Hello, Cyprian. Oh, looks like the video actually just popped on. We might not have to do audio only today. Hell yeah. Alrighty. Well, this is going to be our third conversation, and I guess before we get into things, how you been?
It's certainly been an exciting week in being a first-time political candidate.
Anything in particular? How's the race going?
Um, right now, I think maybe 100 people will have actually heard of me.
Damn. Well, I'm rooting for you, man, because man, you got a good heart. We need people with a good heart in Washington, with a good soul people that just want to do good. We don't got enough of that these days. So, I hope more of your name gets out there.
Well, I fully expect to lose.
Well, it's all about the journey.
Yep.
Sorry, one moment. My computer is just loving me today. Okay, there we go. All right. Hopefully I will have no more errors on my end here. And yeah, no, this is our third conversation, and you're really big on Scientology, and I don't think we have talked a lick of Scientology yet. You want to get into a little bit of that today?
Well, Scientology is kind of the classic space age cult. It tried to combine the theosophical notion of eternal memory, what do they call it, Akashic records, with the psychobabble of the 1930s and 40s, and the military hierarchy that got so beloved during World War II. And basically it's a cult, but it is a uniquely American cult. And it is very clearly a totalitarian cult. Not the more typical fade into the recesses when people just get bored cult. So if you want to see what American type totalitarianism is, you can take a look at Scientology. It's not, okay, is this a facet of Russian culture or is it a facet of communism? Is this a facet of Chinese culture or is this communism? Is this a facet of German culture or is it a facet of Nazism? Is this a facet of Italian culture or is this a facet of fascism? When you have an American totalitarian cult, you don't have the same difficulty in picking apart what is totalitarian and what is just the local culture.
That's so wild. And I remember about a year or so ago, I actually got to go see the Scientologist compound down in Southern California. And thankfully, the car and our battery died at the In-N-Out right before, so we didn't break down right outside the compound because I swear that compound was miles long with villages. You couldn't see like any of the lights on, none of the people, security cameras. And to know that there was like a native tribe, like territory right on the other side of the mountain, like there's just so much going on with this group that, oh my god, it's power. Like they are a powerful, powerful organization with control over a lot of minds.
They definitely were a very egotistical cult. And if you listen to, there's a bunch of interviews with people who used to work for the cult online, including a guy who was a security guard at that Hemet compound. So things he dealt with was just patrolling the perimeter. I mean, okay, you've got a lot of expensive audio recording equipment there. We can understand why someone would have to be a security guard. But it was also tracking down people who escaped.
Mm-hmm. And I can't even imagine. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
He did things like trying to negotiate with the local fire authorities and sheriffs because, okay, they're trying to not get crushed by the government. So they want to act all friendly and nice to the government bureaucrats. And to a large extent, it works because they're not stupid criminals. They're criminals, but they're not stupid criminals.
So one of the things I got to understanding from down there, on top of them like sharing land with the native tribes, or at least being right next door to it, from what the locals were telling me, there's a lot of shadiness that goes on with, police bribery, with local cartel gangs. Like, can you give us a little insight onto how some of that operates?
I don't know that much about the cartels, but there is a suspicion that Scientology, because they have a covert means of transferring money and supplies, because the cult members aren't going to blab all that easily, they may have used that for money laundering.
Yeah.
That is speculation. And a number of Scientology locations in other countries have had people arrested for violating financial disclosure laws and money laundering.
Well, I mean, the great Satan of Scientology is the IRS. I mean, even Xenu was trying to get away from audits.
Yeah.
Which is something I want to go a little deeper into you with, because I just love that side of it. Like, without making fun of it, I love the mythological side of Scientology, because, like, right down when you get to the Galactic Federations, there's talks of Galactic Federation in the KGB Book of Alien Races, so it's not the only place with mentions of certain things, and it's just an interesting rabbit hole. Not to detract too much from that. Sorry, I kind of got off on a tangent.
Well, a number of Scientology organizations pay off-duty cops to provide security, and quite often they lie to the people who are doing that security work to make them more aggressive towards protesters. And they pay those people a lot. So a number of cops in the LAPD probably were able to buy boats or a down payment on a second home because of all the money that Scientology was shelling out for those off-duty security services.
I could see that. Could you go a little bit more into the protest aspect of that? Because I've never thought to put together Scientology with protest. I don't even think I have an example in my head.
Oh, wow. Well, even in the 70s, there are a few people who are occasionally protesting at Church of Scientology, but that wasn't big because those were in really run down and not very nice places. So people didn't go there to hold up a sign and maybe annoy people a little bit. In the late 80s and 90s, Scientology locations became more corporate. That is, they tried to make them nice, tried to renovate them, tried to make them look pretty, and put them in nicer areas. And the result was, if they're in nicer areas, they're more accessible to both the general public and to people who want to protest them. So you started to see people show up to a location, hold up a sign saying, X disconnected from her mother and father. They haven't talked to us for 20 years or something like that. Although, okay, that might be a little long for the 90s. More like it was 4 or 5 years. Now there are trackers for how long people have been out of contact with their family, and it's more like 7 or 8 years is pretty common.
Jesus.
But during the late 90s and early 2000s, you started to see kind of a bunch of never been in Scientology people show up to those protests. And they were pointing out things like, oh, they're feeding people in the Sea Org, the paramilitary volunteer force. They get paid $50 a week. They've raised it to a bit more than that now. But back then it was pay $50 a week. And Scientology was bragging that they provided food for those people on about $1 a day. You can't get a lot of really good food on $1 a day.
So now you're shoving thousands and thousands of dollars per person, per Dianetics program or book. Like, it's all the money in the world. And you're still doing that to your people.
Yep. Scientology has the money to provide decent accommodations for its people. And only the top executives get anything near that.
So it's a bit like communism.
I mean, there's a reason why the guy who was born in a communist country is paying attention to Scientology.
Well, I could see that there'd be a lot to extract there, because I mean, goddamn, one thing I've been noticing with the Israel and Palestinian protests going on with a lot of the pro-Hamas protesters, I was watching a video with, I think his name was Rudy Rockman, who he was at one point an IDF soldier, and he's been going around to different college campuses. And there's this kid he was trying to talk with, and this kid wasn't on his side with things, but was still willing to sit there and listen, even if he was being a little snarky about it. And now I'm starting to see with these protests, more so than with Black Lives Matter, there's a PR team involved. There's people walking around these protests saying, our people don't want you to talk to that, refer them literally to the PR team. Like, and that feels very reminiscent of Scientology. And I'm concerned, especially the more the government, should it choose to sympathize with the protesters to an extent where, I don't know, they put legalities in allowing them to target or stifle people's freedom of speech and have the control they want. It just seems like it's becoming more and more organized, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it's freaky.
I mean, there was, even when I was an undergrad, there was already a lot of money flowing into Students for Justice in Palestine. Money from the Qatari government and others. They had PR experts. They had liaisons to those students who would provide information and professional organizing expertise. Nothing in those protests is organic.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of this is coming from Qatar. The more I'm learning, the more I'm realizing there really is kind of a push for essentially a radical Islamic takeover within the United States of America. And part of that involves going after the universities, in the same way that these LGBT woke figures think that they're putting the change into the colleges and they're going to remake their utopia. It seems like a lot of different people have their eyes set on the colleges for their own utopian purposes. And I don't know, to see this radical Islam thing come out so hard, I knew it was going to come out to it. I just didn't expect it to be such a baseball bat to the face moment. Like, here all of it is at once, Like, here's the Intifada, here's shutting down the schools, here's no graduation, fuck the 3 or 4 years we had of COVID. You finally get back in school, but not really. And seeing the parallels from that, and which is things that have happened in the Middle East. This is going to get really, really bad really quick, and it already kind of has.
Well, there's a point at which people have done so many nasty things while in a cult that it's really emotionally hard to get out. There's the observation: faith follows action. People believe after they have done something in a certain direction. When was Dietrich Bonhoeffer most committed to fighting the Nazis? When he had already taken an action to fight the Nazis, not before. When are people most committed to a project after they have started working on it? When were people the most committed communists? After they had done things to advance communism that they could not justify otherwise. Konstantin Kissim likes telling the story. When the atrocities and the uselessness of the Stalinist purges was revealed, a bunch of the people who had participated committed suicide. They could no longer live with what they had done. So it's very hard for people to leave that kind of group because they have committed themselves so heavily by their own actions.
And the difference is this time is there's a system in place that not only encourages suicide and self-depression and mental illness, but in terms of Canada and even a couple places in the United States, I think they have one facility here in Salem. They'll put you down like a dog because you're sad. Doesn't matter if those reasons are political or psychological or physical. It's not about pulling the plug on grandma anymore because she can't breathe. It's, are you a mature minor? Are you 16 and so depressed and mature that you want to die? How about the same government that put you down, made you feel like shit? How about we just put you in a pod and put you to sleep? Like, that wasn't an option back then. So it's almost like the system in place is creating that out, if you will, for a lot of vulnerable people.
Yes, that seems scarily plausible. I think it's entirely likely that after manipulating a lot of young people into doing things that will destroy their lives, rich people will lobby to allow them to kill themselves so they don't have to deal with the side effects of the people they victimized.
Yeah, and taking the suicide aspect out of it, it's one thing I noticed with PTSD and anxiety. A lot of people, whenever I got out of Antifa, who may have dropped off the protest at the same time, who didn't leave the ideology, for them it was they had PTSD because it was flung upon them. They have anxiety, they have this. Like after the protests and the riots, just add 20 more mental illnesses to the roster. But really, what those are, while important in identifying, yeah, those events are going to give you PTSD and trauma and anxiety and all the things. It creates a shield, and that shield creates you from having to take any personal responsibility, because why are you breaking down today? Oh, well, it must be my PTSD. Not guilt from you doing something wrong on top of your PTSD. It has to be purely the PTSD. So this fixation, it keeps people from going on to the next stage. Like Black Lives Matter, I feel like was activated as a sense, who wants to be a revolutionary? Who's willing to go after the government? Okay, now we've got you fighting. And now we've taken a lot of those people out of the fight. And how many of those people would have been here to counter what's going on with the Hamas protesters? Not the Palestinian protesters, but the Hamas protesters, who, if there were good people still involved who didn't feel discouraged or disenfranchised, might be there to counter some of the bullshit right now.
Yeah. What I find, one thing I found so fascinating about the rise of uh, Black Lives Matter and a lot of the anti-capitalist stuff is that it changes where people have a sense of locus of control. Who has control? Me or vague outside forces that can't be defined or analyzed?
Mm-hmm.
And psychologically, it's easier to take action if you believe you have power. It's harder to take action if you believe somebody else who you have no idea who has power.
And that's where a lot of the cognitive dissonance comes in, because when you have the media, when you have all these Democratic politicians who are patting you on the back, giving Antifa plausible deniability, saying things like peaceful protest, you're basically given permission. That is the power. You are given permission out of all the others. That's not permission the KKK or any of these far-right groups had to go out and vandalize the town. That was specifically for the left, for Black Lives Matter, for Antifa. But simultaneously, they don't see that, and they see everything. Well, so long as you're focusing on the conservatives, then you're powerless. And really what you're doing is you're struggling to get that power. You're struggling to get that little drop of control, even though you have all the control and all the power in the world. So like I've said multiple times, I never got arrested for anything I did. And most of what I did during the protest was in front of a police officer. They just sit and watch. That's power. That's permission. That is something the KKK, thankfully, does not have in this country, but the communists do.
Yeah. And the impression I get is that, so a number of lawyers very definitely sympathize with Antifa. There were people trying to recruit people to bail out rioters while the riots were going on within various bar associations.
Yeah.
And something that I saw people say was that these people don't have any real power. Well, maybe the individual guy who is working a minimum wage job and barely hanging on because of all the mental trauma doesn't have a lot of power. Whoever is organizing these people has enough power to burn down my old city. I used to live in
Yeah.
Minneapolis. I'm still bitter.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That I mean, with Minneapolis, they just gave up the police department. Like when they're like,
Yep.
there's still weapons and files, and like it was, we have nothing to do. Here you go. The police got a call on their phone, and they're like, get out in 10 minutes. Like, for anyone who's listening to this, go watch the Fall of Minneapolis documentary. They have it free on YouTube, and I mean, I could say without that documentary, I wouldn't have even seen the full George Floyd footage Like, even when I went on Buck Angel, I still thought George Floyd had been murdered. And when I sat there and watched that, I was like, Jesus. One martyr took down an entire city. Like, it's unfortunate, and I wish the man didn't die, but let's be real. He was given every outing. Derek Chauvin said, we're going to take you to the mental hospital. We're going to take you to the hospital. Saw him swallow the ball of fentanyl. None of this is debatable anymore. And the city was destroyed. Where's the accountability for that? I can't even imagine what it's like to live there now. That's got to be worse than living in Portland. The sense of power those people must feel now. Do you have any sense of what the climate is like these days, post the fall?
I visited a year ago. I saw a lot more grime and dust, a lot more boarded up smaller businesses. I saw fewer cop cars. And when at the light rail stations, people seemed to have their eyes downcast. They were staying apart from each other. Seemed like people did not want to attract any attention to themselves.
It's basically like Eugene and Portland then.
One of my college friends is raising some small kids, and he is gonna, at least a year ago, was about to engage in the third move in about 6 years to get away from rising crime.
We really saved the city, guys. If anyone's hate listening to this and wants to think that Black Lives Matter and Antifa was this big, grand, utopian thing, is this a fucking utopia? Is any of this good? Was any of this worth it? Do you feel safer? Does anyone in the blue cities feel safer? Like, none of this ever made any sense to begin with. And like, how the fuck do you go back from that without having some sort of globalist Halliburton Raytheon type group coming in and saying, we're going to rebuild the entire city for you, and we're going to try something new, and we're going to put in all these new security measures, and we're going to get the AI systems, and we're going to make your Walmart look like some sort of dystopian RoboCop checkout center? Like, it just, like, you walk outside and everything feels like it's falling apart, but then you walk into these buildings and it feels more and more futuristic, but more and more like Big Brother's watching you everywhere you go, and less people working at the register simultaneously, everywhere with a help wanted sign. And the amount of communist, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd murals we have painted around this place is fucking ridiculous. And they were all erected after the city got destroyed. Like, we're creating our own hells here. Well, other people weren't. People like me certainly were, but
Well,
it's not only something. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The bit about big corporations being brought in to rebuild the city is what's happening in DC. And it's been happening for years. So for a long time, there's been political pressure to not police the poor Black parts of town. Well, obviously, crime is going to go up. It's going to be hard to run a small business there. People are going to be too traumatized to be effective workers. And kids aren't going to get a good education because they don't want to die because the schools are unsafe. So what happens? Developers come in, buy up a bunch of the land, plop down big apartment blocks with modern security measures, cameras everywhere. And then you have a bunch of yuppies move in, and they don't want to be victims of crime. So then they pull political strings in order to get more policing, and boom, the locals are squeezed out despite having lived in the town for generations. And the incomers are under massive electronic surveillance because that's what it takes to be safe in the area.
It's all a beast system. It's all interconnectability. It's a global form of control. It's very biblical. It's very biblical in the way that it's happening. And that's not to preach one narrative over another. That's just my personal perspective. But I think we as a society need to learn to minimize our reliance on technology, because it's turning us into addicts. And not only that, we've gotten to the point where we're worshiping technology, like inadvertently. Like, one example I have in my head is that our phones are listening to us. We know that. I could talk about trampolines right now in 5 minutes. My husband's phone, I got a flip phone, so I don't got to deal with it as much, but his phone will pull up a trampoline. We all know how this works. It's predictability. It's listening in on you. It's not great. Just imagine the Jews in the 1940s walking around with iPhones. What could have happened to them? We are setting ourselves up for fucking failure. Well, how many times have you got something on your phone and there's two responses? There's, oh, I just talked about this. My phone is listening to me. Ha ha. Go on about your day. Or there's the other type of response. Oh my God, we were just talking about this. Isn't this just synchronicity? It's crazy how the universe works. So you notice how people are misconstruing signs from the universe and God with technology simply on the basis that they don't understand it. It's like you can watch the separation from reality and all this bullshit happen in real time, and it's just,
Well, it's easier for
oh, it's
people to
scary.
deny. I mean, there's the instinct to deny things if people feel powerless to do anything about it. I'm powerless to do anything about Google data mining the contents of my phone for the purposes of marketing or who knows what else.
Yeah.
Now, I could deny it and maybe feel better, or I could acknowledge it and feel terrible.
Yeah. And it's a hard place to be on, and can't pretend to know the answer. I mean, I still use YouTube and the internet and all that. I will say, though, having a flip phone, some days I forget I have a cell phone, and that is a nice feeling. A really, really good feeling. People should support the flip phone industry before flip phones are no longer available, because it'll save you.
I've heard a number of people switching over to flip phones. They just feel so much better, and they don't
I
have to
have
deal
text,
with
call, and YouTube. That's it.
and they don't have to deal with all the temptations that come with a smartphone of, oh, let me look this up online. Oh, I can't do that. Guess I'm going to have to actually remember it.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention, like, these phones are built like slot machines. All of the gizmos and flashing lights and the whirring and the vibrations, it's meant to trigger the pleasure receptors in your head so you keep coming back. No one ever put that thought into the flip phone. They were just thinking call and text. Now it's liable to be hacked, and it's not the safest thing in the world. If anything, it has less protections than a smartphone. But I have nothing that needs protecting on that phone outside of outgoing calls, text messages, and my YouTube history, which is mostly video game shit outside of my political channel. So it's like, what does it matter? There's little things I feel like we can do to tweak our mindset, because they are trying to hijack our brainwaves.
Yeah. Right now, we live in the attention economy. And that means whoever can force people to pay attention to them can make a lot of money or win a lot of votes.
Yep. Fortunately, the way of having people pay attention to you now is to start a national tragedy or an international one.
Yeah, because bad news tends to sell a heck of a lot better than good news.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of bad news, so since the last time we talked, the Iranian president's dead.
I feel
What's your
so
theories
bad
on
for
that
that
one?
helicopter.
I know. Poor thing got dinged up really bad. I don't think he'll ever fly again. But all jokes aside, I am a little bit terrified. It's like, okay, so I mean, everyone has speculation, everyone has theory. Obviously, anything you or I has to say doesn't put any weight on what actually happened. But a lot of suspicious events leading up to it. I guess the big question is, who did it? The United States, Ukraine, ISIS, Iran? Was it a fake assassination attempt in the cover of the fog? Like, what do you think? What's your perspective on it?
Actually, it sounds like a typical overconfident politician. They're used to getting their way, and they think nature will be as scared of them as regular people are. So they decide to fly in dangerous flying conditions, and eventually they roll the dice and they lose. Kobe Bryant died, and there's just the reality that flying on instruments is dangerous, and deliberately flying into fog is dangerous. And politicians, especially ones in regimes that tend to kill off their educated people because they're disloyal, tend not to be very good at science. So they don't realize just how dangerous flying is.
You know, it's like I go into like some of your perspectives sometimes, and I'm just like, no, I want it to be more than what it is. I want it to be broader. I want it to have all these different layers. And then you just explain the simple things, and I just sit there with it, and I'm like, you know, I can 100% see that. Like, because in my head, I'm like, all right, the plane went down, but he jumped out at the last second, and maybe he's at a nearby bunker, or maybe the Americans got cocky and had some sort of anti-aircraft system snuck into the mountains, or maybe ISIS is trying to pull a wild card. But that's also just as likely, if not more likely, quite frankly. You know, I'm not too sure, quite sure what I believe, but I think that simultaneously with that open question in the air, I guess the next question becomes, I guess if it doesn't matter who killed him, if that's, or if he went down or what, since there is the open question, do you see the Iranian government trying to use that open question as a pretext for some sort of broader action to be taken in the Middle East, the United States or Israel, or to at least make the declaration, maybe to cover up for their own stupidity, no, this wasn't a crash, this was an assassination, and we need to hold those responsible?
The natural instincts of any totalitarian government is to beat down rivals who might emerge when they sense the government is vulnerable. Right now, the presumed heir to the supreme leader died, so the Iranian government is starting to look a heck of a lot more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way they can really solidify their rule is to start purging people. So they'll probably go after people within the Iranian government and ordinary dissidents again, much more brutally.
Basically panic mode.
Right, yeah.
At a really inconvenient time. Huh.
So, yeah, it's inconvenient to them, but if they want to stay in power, that's what they got to do.
So, for the current moment, who's taking that position of power? How do you even get a president in Iran? Is it election based? I feel like it's
ostensibly elections, but who can run is scrutinized by the religious leadership, and that's extremely political. And anybody who really disagrees with the government is not going to be eligible either because they get murdered, arrested, or otherwise disqualified.
okay. That's about basically how I envision.
So basically,
elections, but not really.
Yeah.
So who's currently taking the reins right now? Who's the new Raisi for the moment until?
No idea. The Khamenei's son was being thought of as a possible successor, but the Iranian government didn't want to go down the path of North Korea and have a barely disguised monarchy. So what's going to happen? I have no idea. But they just don't want to be too obvious that it's a pure insiders club.
God, I would hate to live in that country right now. God, that just gotta be a fucking nightmare. But yeah, no, that's definitely a conundrum to be facing at the current moment. There's just so much happening in that region right now.
Well, I can at least say I'm glad I'm not living there.
Yeah, agreed. It's not that anywhere's fun right now, but it's a hell of a lot better than that, we'll say. But I do simultaneously worry about radical reprisal within the United States. You know, say they do leave it an open question, or if they do push the blame with Pride Month coming on next month. The last 2 weeks, Raisi was very, very outspoken with Sharia law and making it very clear where Islam stood on LGBT, queer for Hamas, and all that, and was very, very explicit on what you do with people like that. And I guess with that being not his final words, but some of his final words, that's going to resonate with people pretty heavily as we move into the month of June.
Well, I guess you're right that if Iran decides to blame American influence, whether it's true or not, it's convenient to them to blame Americans. They might send some of their agents to strike back. But I have no idea if that's going to happen or if that's going to be reported.
Yeah. I'm not looking forward to next month. I've already chosen to take a month of silence off from posting, and I'm just going to try to stay away from like some of the political topics for a month, because June just becomes a hellscape every year. And now with this Islamic element, you have so many people in the queer LGBT community that are just poking and poking and poking and poking. And I don't want to make a video in the middle of June if 50 people get gunned down and just being crass, being like, yeah, what did you fucking think was going to happen? Because it's just getting so freaking infuriating at this point. The level of poking and prodding and spitting at the bear, and I have to remember that it is all by design, that these people's minds were warped to go into this direction, and it is all artificially created in order to put the LGBT people in a war with religious communities and just help inflame the fight. But I've heard of that one.
It was written way back in 1997.
Can you give us a little synopsis of it?
Basic gist: a professor of marketing points out that the era of general audience marketing is dead. Mass marketing is no longer the major moneymaker. Niche marketing is in, and niche marketing works a heck of a lot better by alienating outsiders of the target audience.
Okay. This is all the way back in 77 then, huh?
97.
Oh, 97. Okay, that sounds more. Yeah. Yeah, because it's funny you mentioned that, because I was putting together. Well, I have an interview that I did with the girl named Maria. She's with Gays Against Groomers, and I was doing little commercial breaks throughout the video, because it's about 2 hours long. So I just have like 3 or 4 commercials every 30 minutes each, just as like a kind of comedic relief. And I really have a thing for old commercials. I love watching commercials from the 80s and the 90s and the 60s and the 70s. Even though I wasn't there, there's just something nostalgic and fun about it at the same time. But you really do see a difference as you start to get into the 2000s of the type of material that you're seeing, where it seems to start to get a little goofier and wilder, but then it does start to get a little more overtly political. Like, I have a Taco Bell ad in there with the Taco Bell Chihuahua dog, and he's in the middle of like a Che Guevara style revolution, and he's like on the balconies, and there's like these giant red flags hanging down with gordita crunches on the middle of them, and everybody's cheering, and he's the new dictator. And yeah, that would be about the time period that you would have seen that kind of radical change. But not to detract too much from what you're saying, just marketing's wild.
Most of the propaganda Americans experience is commercially or is commercial in nature. So one of the things I think that really started to kind of drive people apart was when marketing departments got taken over by propagandized young people. And that's one reason why there's so much of a political fight over Disney. Forget the stuff about Disney World in Florida and all that.
Hmm.
There's another bunch of people looking at Disney, looking at, okay, what is their messaging? What is their market research? Why are they putting these messages in the movies in their advertising? People
Yeah.
are doing this. They're going from mass market to parents and kids, broad appeal, to niche appeal and ideological claims.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll add the footage in with this. There was one of Disney's creative directors or somebody at the charge of one of their teams there. She literally goes on camera and she says, "We are trying to have a queer agenda here at Disney. Our goal is to put as much of this into this content as possible." And again, like a supervillain, just laying out her whole master plan. In her mind, she might be think she's doing the right thing. But also, let's look at the history of Disney pre-woke before we go into that, because I want to stay on this Disney topic for a minute, because I feel like there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm a bit of a nerd, so I do love Disney. But let's look back to like the Little Mermaid, the Dick Towers in the background, the Lion King, the stars spell sex in the sky. Like you have all these different examples. Peter Pan talking about taking little boys off to an island away from the parents, the bad little boys, the ones who don't behave and listen. But don't worry, they don't come back as boys. Like you have all this creepy sexualized shit from Disney that existed prior to all this woke shit. A lot of people on the left like to pretend like that didn't happen, even though we were the generation who were constantly pointing it out on our VHS covers, on our DVDs, pausing the scenes to like show our friends all the nasty shit hidden in the Disney movies. But the kids who got that are the kids who are now in charge of that. And Disney's just gotten nasty. Like, I'm trying to talk to my mom about like Star Wars books for her to show her kids because I'll read some of the young adult novels. But after reading some of the High Republic comics, I was just like talking with her about it. And I'm like, yeah, let me actually read these young adult novels first to make sure it's appropriate for your kids because that's the point we've gotten to. Because some of this stuff is just so overtly political or sexual or I got to the end of my High Republic comic and I'm going to do a video on it, but it went into this whole queer anarchy thing where you have this raider group that's the main villain, right? Called the Nile. And they, plunder and steal and burn your village down to the ground. And they'll snort drugs. They do spice. They get drunk on wine. And you have this one that shows up and she has like a kind of leather punk jacket that you might see at a lot of the protests these days, kind of reminiscent of the 80s with the spikes and then a little logo on the back for the Nile and like this rainbow mohawk coming out, right? And there's this little girl who's getting picked on because she has two moms. She's getting racist remarks, getting called a tailhead, which has always been a thing in Star Wars. So that's fine. And I don't have a problem with those two things either. But she's getting picked on for having two moms and getting all these racist remarks. And then here's this queer character who comes in who's with the villain group, right? And says, hey, why don't we put a scare into those boys? And at first the kid's like, oh, I don't think I should talk to strangers. And then the character's like, I'm not a stranger. My name is so-and-so. Now follow me into the dark forest. So they go into the dark forest with this, she goes with this little queer, or she goes with the queer character and scares the bullies essentially. But by the end of it, the little kid wants to be like that character, despite the fact this character's done everything to demonstrate that this character is a villain. And the last shot is of this kid walking away being like, what a nice lady, and holding on to her toy while the Nile are just destroying her town and burning everything to the ground and executing people. And she's walking away with a smile on her face. And it's very younger generation style cartoon imagery. Like it's a little more childish in its depiction. And the messaging by the end of that, like my jaw hit the floor. I was just like, what the fuck did I just read? And you just start to see it everywhere now. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to do a video on that. I might even include some pictures with this reel, but it's wild.
I mean, one of the things that just boggles my mind is that, okay, people in the Balkans are famous for hating each other. And because they haven't been really very westernized yet, it's still sometimes kind of overt. But people at least acknowledge that hatred is often unproductive and not the most morally laudable thing. Americans have found ways to make excuses for hatred, to disguise it as idealism or compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, bloodlust is a natural temptation, and you have to kind of pull yourself back so you don't hurt people too badly. But if people keep on getting excuses and they get
Mm-hmm.
praised for bloodlust, it's very hard to pull back from the brink before you do something really, really bad.
Yeah, it's it's just so nasty. And think of like how many people just wanted to be like a comic book artist or an actor or a director, and who just their entire life was just to make a really cool movie or a really cool show or a really cool product, who are now put at the forefront of this as figures to be attacked. Like the Star Wars sequels, the lady who played Rey, Daisy Ridley, the one who played Finn, the Asian girl, attacked for being a woman, attacked for being a black, attacked for being Asian. Not anything natural, because Disney pushed it with its marketing as this is anti-Asian, this is anti-black, this is anti-woman. And because they had their teams on that 24/7, you watched every single one of these actors get destroyed. Never mind that the trilogy itself got destroyed because everyone was having to deal with this behind the scene bullshit. The individual people, the girls and boys who just said, I want to be in Star Wars, I want to be a Jedi, I want to be a stormtrooper, I want to be a rebel, who got signed on board, contracted their life away. You know, none of these documentaries are even organic. I can't watch a documentary on the creation of the sequel trilogy because it's all lies, because it's all Disney approved shit. And they have to sit there and they have to take the hate and they have to take the bludgeoning because that's what's making the money. That's what's getting the attention. And then you see it move on to Marvel too. And Disney is really loving that marketing. I think they're starting to flip a little bit. Bob Iger seems a little bit done with it, but the damage is
I,
done.
I mean, the impression I get is that uh, you just hate this movie because the main character is X, is a way of disguising why people would actually dislike it. It's a
Mm-hmm.
form of excuse making to basically protect the reputations of the people who made it from corporate overlords, from stock owners, from investors, from advertisers. And it really pisses the audience off like
Mm-hmm.
nothing you could believe, because come on, that's not how a proper command relationship works. Why didn't she tell the guy what she was going to do? And enough moments like that, and to hear your complaints are just because of X, really irritates a lot of people. But it's stoking up the rage and attributing it to X that allows them to kind of avoid having to think through what they did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They cut off the feedback loop between the audience and the producers to make themselves feel good, to get those short-term benefits. But when you cut off enough of that feedback, you don't have any incentive to correct yourself and you just crash and burn.
And the
And
amount of to which they're willing to cut off too is like no more likes, no more comments, no more. You go onto a Star Wars forum, no political discussion. It's fucking Star Wars. The whole thing is political. It is the story of politics through the ages. But it's to that extent where everything is controlled to where, yeah, there will be no dissenting opinion.
and commercially, Disney is in huge freaking trouble. Their movies aren't making money anymore. Their rides are mechanically falling apart. You have other theme parks that are able to put forth a new ride in about a year and a half. Disney takes about 4 to 5 years if they're working fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
They've
they're trying
cut
to do so many offshoot projects too. Like, let's buy up plots of land for Disney communities. Let's go start a new hotel here. Let's start a new cruise line. They just can't stop consuming.
they're so cut off from reality that they aren't checking to see if the things that they rely on are working. And that
Yeah.
includes audience reactions and customers paying money. So interestingly, Scientology went from being cheap for a large number of people to being very expensive for a very tiny group of people. Disney's the same way. It used to be that ordinary people could afford to stay at Disney World. Now it's really, really pricey. They're making everything so expensive that only a tiny number of people who are really, really fanatical can be part of it.
Yeah. I mean, what, $30 for some popcorn, $1,000 for a lightsaber, $200 for some Mickey Mouse ears. Again, like Scientology, all the money in the fucking world. You could be the leading example of how you can have cheap and innovative products and take care of all your people and create a real magical kingdom, the happiest place on earth. And no, and I don't even know. And the fact they like to they do the pride events too now, and they like to get just so political to the extent where, I mean, what was it? Whenever DeSantis put in the law, the air quote, don't say gay bill, the parental rights bill, all these Disney employees, like 20, 30 years old, decided to take 2 or 3 weeks out of work and protest, even though they weren't kindergarten through 3rd grade, which was the age range the bill would affect. And Disney was just like, okay, shit, we'll even pay some of you. Like, what? It's just wild. It's a silly, silly world that we live in.
Well, one of the ways that Bob Iger got into power was making an alliance with a bunch of their HR people, including DEI people. So
that makes sense.
If they would have fired the people who refused to show up to work, one, where would they get the replacements? And two, those are the people brought in by Iger's close allies within the company. So Iger's own power over the people in the company would be weakened by doing anything that would rein back that impulse.
These people are fucking idiots.
What have I been telling you?
I mean, it's... Again, it's like, they're idiots, and then you just verbalize it, and it's like, no, they really are just fucking batshit retarded. I mean, this week, talking to Bob Iger, he puts out his statement, and he's just like, we need to slow down on these projects. The investment is not yielding the return, whatever. But he's basically just saying things that the South Park special said about 2 months ago.
And that other people, those boring investor guys, were saying a year before that.
Like, oh my God. I just want it to go back to what it was. I want them to sell Star Wars back to Lucas, and then I want everything else to just go back to what it was. Because I do love Disney. I'm a nerd. But I sit here every time now wondering if the project I'm looking forward to, they're going to ruin. I'm looking forward to the Acolyte. I'm reading the High Republic. I'm reading the comics. Some of the bullshit aside, I'm probably one of 200 people actually supporting the High Republic initiative because I'm actually really excited for the project coming out. And then you have this queer director just yapping her fucking trap behind the scenes being like, fuck Whitey, fuck the straights, fuck the cis. And I'm just like, if you fuck with this goddamn story, if you want to bring it in, make it make sense. Make your politics make sense if you're going to bring it in. But starting to get a little worried. And it's things that I actually care about because it sounds so silly. But for a guy like me, I have 80 Star Wars books sitting on a shelf. I've been watching it since I was a little kid. These may just sound like movies or projects to other people, but to the people that care about them, these actually mean something and they pervert it.
American pop culture is modern mythology.
Mm-hmm.
It communicates values, ideas, instincts. RoboCop is not just, an action story about a cyber cop. It's about moral debates. Where does a machine end? Where does your humanity begin or stop? What are corporations actually like? They act like sociopaths, but is it because the people are sociopaths or because that's just the way a large organization works? If the police no longer have the authority given by the government, are they still the police or are they just a gang?
Oh.
How does the human mind on drugs work differently than a human mind on machines? These are all concepts that you get in the RoboCop movie. These are great questions. And it's a pop culture movie, but it's a better argument about philosophical ideas than you're probably going to get in a philosophy paper.
Yeah. And I feel like Jordan Peterson, when he breaks down Disney movies like Pinocchio and The Lion King, he does a fantastic job of just breaking down all the psychological elements. But he also does well to explain. He's just like, you don't need to understand all these psychological elements, like word for word. You don't need to know everything step by step and what's happening behind the scenes. Your brain is subconsciously translating that for you. These are lessons that you don't have. Even for some of us, we might sit down and think deeply on it. For others, they might just be like, oh, I get that moral lesson and move on. But the brain is still receiving that message. They're destroying that message. I mean, the Lost Boys in Peter Pan, renegade men, little boys who go off and are miscreants and run away from their parents. And, there's a whole side of that. You could probably fill a novel with what that represents. And then Disney just has to come in and put a couple girls in there. And not only that, but make a joke at the audience at the same time and say, fuck you. And it's like, okay, well, show me how that's psychologically beneficial. And on the contrary, it's actually becoming psychologically harmful because you have all these kids digesting this. And whenever they hear the older generation or people with fucking sense say this is retarded, then they act like there's a Nazi takeover happening, which is another thing is, as a lot of this DEI shit, if it starts to get flushed out, a lot of these extremists and a lot of these younger suggestible people, this is going to translate as a Nazi takeover in their head.
I mean, I already encountered a guy in DC politics. We were arguing about changes to the tax code. And I was arguing, hey, when Massachusetts raised taxes, they lost $4.5 billion of adjusted gross income. They were losing their tax base because the tax base was moving out of the state. So don't do what Massachusetts did. Well, he basically said that the people of those of us who are arguing about raising the tax rate were fascists. It was just an objective question about would you get a larger tax base with more taxes or less taxes?
Just a fiscal argument. You're just being like, hey, this is how I think the money is affecting things. This is how I think I should do it. And somehow in that you're blending corporate and government power and Zeke Heiling and
Guy was in his
this is so disrespectful.
late 30s. He was being pretty darn disrespectful to a journalist who's been writing about DC for the past 30 years.
These people, it disgusts me even more when it's the older generation, because the younger generation, propaganda, brainwashing, failed education system, I get that. I can look around at people my age and be like, I get why you're stupid. I get it. It's fine. You'll get better over time. 30, 40, 50, and you're on that bullshit, fuck off. Like, grow up. Because that's just not... To have lived through 30 years of life, to have seen so much history, well, for someone like that, that just tells me that's the type of person who chose to opt out of history, to opt out of looking at the news or a newspaper or reading any books. That's all that tells me about that person, is they have no context. But to have 30 years of your life to where you've had the ability to have that context and you chose to opt out to the point where you're making disrespectful claims like that, I have so little sympathy for that. It's so disrespectful. Like, millions of Jews slaughtered, burned to death, buried, raped, all of the most horrible things in the world. And that's reflective of you for saying, hey, I don't think we should raise taxes. That's our government. And the young kids, they hear that too, and it's so simple. That's easy for them to pick up on. That's only like 2 or 3 little points. But for like a 16 or 17-year-old hearing that, who may have never heard you speak ever before, then in their head, if they see, especially hear that, and then see people in the room clapping or agreeing with it, that kid's just going to take that because that's where they're going to get their kudos. So it's like, I feel like a lot of these people are putting on a performative act in order to kind of train the little ones like dogs at the
Yeah.
same time. I'm not saying I know what this individual's case is. All I know is he's a fucking idiot, but
Yeah, I mean, just as a basis for trying to keep your own reputation intact, you probably don't want to insult one of the most prolific journalists in the city who's been working for decades. Do not get into fights with people who buy ink by the barrel and who have personal connections in all of DC government and media.
it's funny because all these left-wing politicians think they can turn into Trump now because a lot of Trump's administration was being snappy with the media, and now they think that they can like take it on and champion it. Whether Trump doing that was good or not, depending on the moment, I think it definitely varied. But they saw, oh, people responded to that. What if I get snippy with this reporter? And then you just get all these crazy bloopers and gag reels from it happening that it doesn't work. Y'all ain't Trump. I'm not trying to pat Trump back too much here, but damn, y'all can't do what he did.
I mean, the classic political analysis is that Trump's snark and hostility towards the media actually made him seem more credible because he was obviously an outsider. If an insider tries it, it just looks like he's bullying people into falling into line.
Mm-hmm.
But if an outsider does it, it looks like they're fighting the system.
Yeah. And I think the thing with Trump, too, is looking back in hindsight, because like I said, all of Trump's presidency, I did not support him. Any ounce of support I have for him has only come in the last year or so. But, fuck, what was I saying? I had it, and then it was gone, and I'm going to clip that out unless it comes back. But... Oh, wait, no. It was, Trump is just saying things to people that I think a lot of people were thinking in their heads. How many people are sitting there looking at the TV and being like, I wish someone would just tell this bitch that she is a dumb bitch and to shut the fuck up. And then you see Trump do it, and it's just like brain melting, earth shattering, and then to have it happen time and time and time again. That I could see how that would speak to the average American in hindsight. I didn't get it at the time, but as someone who looks at the TV and it's just like, I wish someone would tell Biden this right now, or I just wish someone would throw a fucking shoe at him. Like, I guess whenever that shoe finally does get thrown, you're going to get a lot of support, whether it's good or not.
I have my own gripes about Trump, but mostly because I was looking at the bureaucracy at that time, and Trump talked a good game, but when it came time to actually administer things, he just didn't have the attention span for it.
I agree with that.
That tends to be true of politicians in general, and he was not uniquely bad in that respect.
Just someone who wanted to make a lot of promises, though. He
made a lot of promises. He got a lot of people really optimistic, and he didn't follow through because, frankly, he didn't care about the minutia of how the civil service works. But that's politicians everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I don't know. I'm still trying to get on terms with Trump. I feel like he's going to be president again, so I'm trying to get it all sorted in my head properly this time because it's like, I mean, I know it's not a guarantee, but it's
Biden's support is basically catastrophic right now.
Mm-hmm.
It would take more than typical levels of election fraud to get Biden to win.
It would take emergency wartime powers, particularly ones that Obama might have put in. That's another thing I'm worried about.
And
again, speculation, but
Biden does not have the buy-in from influential people now that he did back in 2020. Of course, one of the things that was part of that buy-in was Antifa smashing up cities and scaring the business community into saying, okay, we'll do anything for quiet because we don't want our business to go up in flames.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's what I saw. Anytime I see a Black Lives Matter in the sign still, I'm just like, that's just lamb's blood. That's just put it over your door. The angel of death will pass by you. Don't worry about it. I'm
Heck,
one of you guys.
I know one restaurant in DC where the guy, a bunch of people came up with a very pricey BLM sign. The restaurant owner said, "No, no, I'm not gonna take it. I'll pass." Day later, brick goes through the window. Next time the guys come around, he pays for the sign.
Yeah, that's
Based
what the
on true
mafia
story.
did. That's what ISIS does. That's what Al Qaeda does. Like, just because it's a bunch of white boys who were running around thinking you should own guns, it doesn't make it any different. Like, that is, I did a lot of stupid shit, but that just wasn't something you would have caught me doing. That's something that, as I saw it going on, it just kind of like woke me up a little more. But people really thrive on that, because the mentality of people here was, well, if you don't have a sign, who the fuck are you? What do you support? Because if you're not with us, then you're against us.
Oh, because intimidation is a great way to have an open society.
God, it's utopian thinking just doesn't work. It just does not work at all. But yeah, we should spend some more time on Scientology, because I really want to get down into the Scientology rabbit hole with you some more, because I feel like there's so much to get distracted on with everything. But when it comes to like the idea of end goals, let's say, utopias, the great finale, that moment we're all trying to reach, what is that for Scientology? Is it only interested in long-term preservation and keeping itself going, or is there a point that they're trying to get to, not as an individual but as a collective?
Well, in theory, the goal for individuals is to become a perfectly healed soul, capable of what we would call superpowers. Oh, what's the reason that I forget things? Oh, it's because my soul has been overcome with past trauma, or I'm being controlled by alien souls that are still burdened by their own trauma. Okay, get rid of that, and I will be able to do things like move things with the power of my mind, throw a snowball 200 meters, remember everything.
So is
That's
that
their goal.
usually, so it's more like focused on the self than the overall collective? There's no, we're going to use these powers and these abilities to create a better society or a better world. It's simply, we're going to achieve these things.
Yes and no. So the initial selling point for individuals is you get superpowers, or you get healed of all your psychological diseases or your physical ailments, which must be psychological in origin. The ostensible collective goal is that once we have healed a few people, we will then try to heal society. And then we will try to heal Earth, and then move on and break out of the prison Earth and heal another planet, and heal a sector, and then heal more sectors, and to overcome the evil in the universe.
I guess this is where my concern comes in, and this is where I start to get conspiratorial and speculative and just really start to wonder. So you have a society of people who this is their goal. A lot of them are living in these compounds away from people. A lot of people aren't allowed to Google, to research, really kept in a information type bubble. And these powers include telekinesis, yeah, I think the word, telekinesis, and communication with your mind, and levitation, perhaps invisibility, things that once seemed fictitious, and maybe even so during L. Ron Hubbard's time, but now we have invisibility cloaks. Now we have beings who do seem as though they're able to communicate with their mind, allegedly. We have technology that can help you levitate. We have things to where, just put it in this context, if you were to take any of our technologies now and drop them off in a native village a couple thousand years ago, then that's basically a godlike status. Do you think there could come a point in time where the technologies, the things we're learning about, the capabilities that maybe not us as a species have, but other species have, do you think that could come into conflict with Scientology at any given point in time to where these people could be fooled that something miraculous has happened when in actuality it could be human or xenotechnology?
I mean, remember Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Mhm.
And it takes a more abstract understanding of, is this a purely physical process, or is this an appeal to supernatural entities to decide if it is technology or magic? There's also the flip side, leading to a lot of magitech, punk, pop culture stuff, where any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from technology. The premise of Scientology is that you can basically have magic by individual powers. Now, we've managed to develop some kind of visual cloaking technology. We've managed to develop a whole bunch of technologies that would be considered magical 200 years ago. But that's because of well understood physical laws, not because of anything that Scientology was trying to do. I mean, remember, Scientologists believe that a sufficiently clear person can stop a mudslide from happening. And yet their compound got damaged by mudslides. The place where they're supposed to train people to be able to stop that stuff.
Yeah. I think it's the gullibility that gets me, because we really do live in what's becoming more and more of a sci-fi mixed with magical type reality. I mean, in our conversations, we've talked about like reptiles and dimensions and people flying at this point, turning invisible. Like it just feels like nothing's off the table. So I just worry for people that are so gullible like that, thousands and thousands of dollars with this group that probably has connections to people working on this type of thing. If at the very least these people aren't subject to some sort of experiment, as though they're I feel like gullibility sounds mean, because a lot of these people do want to do better for themselves. So I don't want to like put down anybody. I'll put down the organization, people like David Miscavige's people in charge. Yeah, fuck them. But the individual, I'm trying to see of it like in terms of Antifa. Like, you wanted to do good, you got involved in something bad, and just try to hash it out from there. But it just makes me feel like these people are subject to the times, essentially, and could be pushed in any sort of direction. I don't know. When I think of this, I just always think of like religious institutions and cults as like, in my head, a lot of them are placed on Earth, or at least operating on Earth, with some sort of higher intelligence, at least paying attention to it. Because how could you not pay attention to those aspects of control? And we'll
Um,
focus on the real life shit too. I just had to get the alien stuff out of the way, because I just wonder. There's so much weirdness in this world, and living this revelatory time, it just feels like everyone's responding to it a little bit differently. And I guess I kind of wonder how Scientology and eschatology mix, and how they're responding to what a lot of people seem to agree might be an end times period.
um, there was a saying, none of us are as dumb as all of us. The behavior people engage in as a collective tends to be very silly when you just think of it as if it was just an individual doing it. So, for example, if you asked an ordinary farmer in the Soviet Union, let's plant grain really close together, and then claim that everything is fine even while people are starving. He'd laugh at you and tell you you're an idiot. But what actually happened?
Didn't work.
None of us are as dumb as all of us. And that's true in Scientology as well. So one funny story, Scientology had the idea of, okay, let's build a super advanced computer system like the founder had from when he knew about it several million years ago. And it was a perfect, totally controlling computer system that could handle everything. What they basically did was fill it so full of scheduling errors that it was basically DDoSing itself. They filled in stuff. They expected paperwork to happen, and it just basically pinged them constantly asking for more paperwork and scheduling things for people that they didn't need.
But see, what happens when you get the right guy to make the right piece of technology, though, or at least close? What if you get the one scientist who he's just so gullible, but he knows how to get pretty close to what you want? Like,
and how do you know you've got that and not a fraud?
Okay, that's a thought. Yeah, because you could just easily trick somebody at that point. Like, this is a supercomputer. Have AI read it, whatever bullshit you wanted to it.
Because there's a type of fraud where a person claims, oh, I've got a wonderful machine that can take in waste material and create something people find valuable. I can take in coal and make rubber. I can take in coal and make oil. Well, actually, they can do that, but it's a lot more complex than it looks like. I can take trash and make oil. And when people actually investigate, oh, the machine does nothing. They've just got two compartments, one that takes in the garbage material and one that already had pre-existing bits of whatever people want. It's so common. We've seen that for a long time. The real trick to that con is finding ways to distract people from actually poking around in the machine.
Yeah.
And in one case, the same guy tried that trick against the US government in World War II, and against the government of West Virginia in the 1980s.
Ooh, tell us that story. I want to know that.
Oh, I forget his name, but he basically claimed he could produce artificial rubber with all the exact chemical properties of rubber using coal.
Oh, so that wasn't just an example you pulled out of your ass. That's a real example.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't just frauds trying to con the American government into stuff, frauds trying to con the German government or the Soviet government.
Just taking advantage of the moment.
Right. Lysenko was a freaking fraud. But he was so able to con the political authorities, who, let's face it, did not have a lot of experience in agriculture, to buy his theories, and basically squeezed out anybody who actually questioned him. So one of the lessons is, the more secretive the society, the easier it is for con men to fool people.
Makes sense. So, if you're down for it, I want to get your perspective on something, just to educate the audience for those who may not know. So in my head, whenever I'm listening to anything about Scientology, I usually divide it up into two eras. I have the L. Ron Hubbard era, and then I have the David Miscavige era. And I'm somebody with a very, very oversimplified view of this. But what are the differences between the eras? Would you say that there's any other significant periods of times within the Church of Scientology? And I guess, how did those tactics of control differ from one to the other?
I would say that, okay, I think that's roughly a good divide, because the goals of L. Ron Hubbard were very different from the goals of David Miscavige. Still, I mean, you can talk about early, middle, and late Hubbard. You can talk about early Miscavige, middle Miscavige, and late Miscavige. So at least in the 1950s, Scientology was still very much a continuation of Dianetics. There is the effort to kind of bring in similar type material. The e-meter wasn't invented by Hubbard, it was invented by someone else. But L. Ron Hubbard found it to be a useful prop.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
this looks scientific. Therefore, it must be doing something, giving a real useful measurement. Hubbard understood the theater of it,
Hmm.
even though it was invented and meant to be a scientific tool. Um, in the 1950s, you had well-meaning people flock to Scientology and spent a lot of time in it because it seemed like an intellectually new concept. It was a place for them to experiment, to think of wild thoughts. Uh, it was a way to be away from what felt like the stifling academic or medical or social orthodoxy of the day. So it was kind of like the early stages of the hippie movement. You had
Okay.
you had academics, you had smart people who just said, "Tune out, man. I'm going to talk about this stuff my way," and they flocked to Scientology.
Were there any early on powerful figures, political or otherwise, that were some of the first to flock on, like any presidents or Congress people or anybody higher up, or did it start lower level and then start
It was
incorporating?
lower level. It might be, here's a university professor, here's a chiropractor, here's some doctor.
Mm.
And at that time, Scientology had some implausible medical claims, but it wasn't so offensively stupid that it would drive doctors away. It was also influential in early science fiction circles. And in the 50s, sci-fi nerds were noticeably smarter than the general population.
Do you think
But
the metaphysical approach kind of helped tamper some of the bullshit? The question of what if and what could be mixed in with the bullshit, kind of leaving it as an open question, kind of drove a little bit more people in.
yes, it was in the very early stages. Hubbard had not formalized, created a, he hadn't developed answers to the questions he was asking people. So it was still open to speculation. It was still open to people putting forth their own ideas.
So he's kind of saying, like, this is what I have. Now please contribute so we can figure it out together, is kind of what he's telling
Right.
people. Okay, that makes sense.
And Hubbard also sold himself as a far more experienced, far more interesting person than he actually was.
Traveled the whole world, all the uncontacted Indian tribes, went into the mountains, unspoken languages. Like, he's
I
got a
mean,
resume.
he claimed to be a war hero. He wasn't. Uh, he claimed
It's not
to have
great.
done all sorts of cool things in the Navy at a time when, I mean, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, the military had a lot of social standing. He wasn't all that bright, but he was very definitely a showman and he could attract attention. And in the early stages, he was offering exciting questions to people, telling them that they could contribute, and gathering around a lot of people who were interested in ideas about healing. And in the aftermath of World War II, a lot of people needed healing.
Yeah. So it's an open market for a lot of different people. Some people
Right.
make Godzilla, some people make cults.
Yeah. And Scientology started out as a healing community with the guy with the goal of culthood. And eventually, Scientology became a healing cult. But it wasn't always a cult.
Were there any other cults at the time, like competing, or let's say competing, or maybe even symbiotic? Like, did they have relationships with other organizations at the time that might have intermingled?
Um, Theosophists were, I suppose you could call them a cult, but they were nowhere near as controlling as Scientology was.
I've heard the name.
So
Can you explain that one a little bit?
Theosophy was kind of a mystical movement. It really got going with Madame Blavatsky and her notions of contacting spirits and Akashic records and contacting uh, history well before ours.
So kind
Uh,
of mediumship. I can see how that would go into
yeah.
the fate and audits and looking into past lives, and that makes sense.
So one way to describe Scientology as it became in the late 60s is basically theosophy with a scientific cover on it.
Okay,
It
that makes
pretends
sense. More
to
mediumship than anything.
basically, yeah. Uh, so Hubbard was taking a lot of ideas from theosophy, but a lot of people at the time rejected theosophy because, frankly, it's ridiculous. Oh, you claim that you can contact ancient spirits and know exactly what happened 50,000 years ago? That's not very plausible.
How did the church
But
respond to this? Because I can't imagine they took it very well.
basically dismissed them both as frauds.
Nothing like no overt like we're at war, we're gonna make a whole big thing about this. It was just kind of like screw you, go do what you're gonna
It
do
was
off in
more,
your
who
corner.
are these lunatics? Uh, Scientology and theosophy attracted a lot of attention in the esoteric, we don't take religion very seriously, brand, well, circles of society, but really did not attract a lot of attention from religious figures other than these are evil cultists and stay away from them.
Makes
I would
sense.
I would bet that L. Ron Hubbard cared a heck of a lot more for what the FDA thought than they cared what the church thought.
I can also imagine with the cult not really being involved with the government, the church would have more of a reason to back off. Because I guess in my head, I'm thinking of the church early on with things like, Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood and the pill and how that tended to cause an uproar. I guess in my head, I expected something similar, but that's even kind of scarier for them just be like, oh, those are just a bunch of lunatics over there. That'll probably turn into nothing.
Planned Parenthood had a heck of a lot more effect on the broader society and the intellectual culture than Scientology ever did.
Yeah.
So, with contraception and Planned Parenthood, there were a lot of intellectuals that were really into it. So, Christian intellectuals were also going to debate that. Scientology was so ridiculous that very few intellectuals bother with it. And those who do either get intimidated very quickly because Scientology does break into people's offices and steal stuff,
Yeah.
or they just say, oh, that's crazy, and don't do much. There's really very little effect that Scientology has on the larger society other than fighting the IRS or Freedom of Information Act laws. Most of what they do is just abuse their own people.
Yeah. So I want to explore just the religious elements for another second here. So, like, I guess my first question is, how does Scientology, to what extent does it consider itself a religion? And does that interfere with, like, say, if you go in with Judeo Christian values, are you allowed to hold those beliefs simultaneously? I imagine not, but I want to, like, kind of get a sense on that. And then also the symbol of the cross on the church. I kind of wonder where that derived from, what the story is there, because obviously it wouldn't be the same cross, I imagine, but I just always see that cross with little points coming off, and I'm just like, that's just. I guess I just want to know about that a little bit.
Um, L. Ron Hubbard was dismissive towards Christianity, but he knew he was living in a mostly Christian country. So if he was going to avoid investigations by the FDA or IRS, getting recognized as a religious organization would be really important to him.
That makes
So
sense.
in the 50s and 60s, it was transparently obvious it was a con. Declaring themselves a religion was a con in order to be able to operate without having to pay taxes or have their medical treatment stopped by the FDA. And having a cross-like symbol makes it a heck of a lot easier to call yourself a church than any of the symbols they would normally use.
To what
They
extent do
knew,
you think side? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
they knew it was a con. The people who were low-level recruits in the 60s knew it was a con.
Do you think Scientology has had anything to do with kind of preserving these old notions of having that protection? Does Scientology, has it ever been speculated or theorized that they might have put a little bit of money into the government to kind of keep their exemption statuses and to keep things away like directly with the federal government? Have there ever been any major scandals involving that, or?
Well, I mean, in their fight with the FDA was pretty low level. A few people's dogs turned up dead, and probably a few people got bribed, but it was relatively low level. Their fight with the IRS was massive and brutal. A lot more people's pets turned up dead. A lot more people were probably bribed. They managed to bundle thousands of lawsuits against the IRS. Their fight against the IRS was so big, you actually saw mainstream conservative organizations join in just because they hated the IRS.
It sounds so fucked up, but in my head, I'm just like, what a perfect Satan. What a corrupt, shitty institution. I would get it. If I wasn't educated on these things prior, I'd get it. But
and I mean, in the 80s, fewer people knew just how bad Scientology was. They were able to intimidate journalists into not revealing nasty things like that woman who ended up dying after being administered two conflicting sedatives. Lisa McPherson.
Is that the ones that was friends with Leah Remy, who they were trying to cover up for a while, or is that a different person?
I think that's a different person.
Okay.
Oh, Leah Remini, she's more notable for the disappearance of David Miscavige's wife.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's a little. Yeah, different then. Good on her for fighting the good fight. I love everything that she's had to come out and say. Like, she seems like she had a snap and said, "Fuck these guys." Really brave.
In the 1950s and 60s, most Scientologists came from the left wing of society. They were actively recruiting hippies. And one of their selling points is, hey, you can get a high without drugs.
It just gets rid of my next question. I was wondering if they ever did anything in regards to psychedelics or spiritual encounters, but
they sought to establish contact between individuals and alleged souls that were hanging on to them.
But and every Thetan had a cluster of souls, is that right? Like,
well,
can we explain the Thetans and the clusters real quick?
Scientology, rather than using the traditional concept of the word soul, decided to kind of change the name so people wouldn't come at it with the same set of philosophical expectations. But basically, a Thetan is a soul. And Scientology teaches that you are not a body that has a soul, you are a soul that has a body. And you have a whole bunch of other souls attached to you. So you might manage to get rid of all your personal emotional problems and trauma from billions of years of existence. But the reason why you can't do superpower stuff is because you've got little souls attached to you that have their own trauma.
And I want to see, and let me know how right I've got this, because I'm a sucker for creationism and end of time stories. So I want to see if I got the Xenu story right. So I can't remember the planet that Xenu comes from, but came from a planet on another galaxy that was facing an overpopulation problem. And the story goes that they were going to oust him. So what he did was
am I right so far? This galaxy.
Is this galaxy? Okay. Was it another Earth in another dimension of this galaxy, or is it a separate planet? Because that part I do get confused on.
Other planets.
Other planets. Okay, so in order to avoid the coup and the audit, the Great Satan, he took people from his planet, collected souls from other worlds, and brought them to Earth, where he then dropped them into volcanoes, simultaneously dropping hydrogen bombs, at which point the souls dissipated from their bodies and were scattered all across the Earth. And that's where the Great Mission arises from. I feel like it's very oversimplified. Is there anything you can add to that?
Pretty close.
Yes.
So Scientology teaches that there are several different alien races, but basically the souls that are supposed to attach to humans basically look human. The Galactic Federation, X number of million years ago, had people who looked human. They dressed like 1950s America. They flew in planes like a DC-3 or DC-10. I don't remember what they looked like. They functioned a lot like modern American life. And it was run by a bunch of loyal officers. There was a coup. Zeno takes control, about to lose control, tries to get his political opponents eliminated. So he brings them in for tax audits, kills them, holds their soul because they knew about reincarnation and if they didn't hold the soul, the opponents would simply be reincarnated and go back to trying to overthrow the government. And to get rid of those souls so they wouldn't rebel against him, they brought him to Earth. And in an act of supreme oddity, the loyal officers took back control and imprisoned Zeno on Earth.
So one of the things that really gets me with this story, and it makes me start to wonder about the origins a little bit. So for me and for on my channel, I'm trying to get every single person who comes on this channel to check out the KGB Book of Alien Races. They have online copies available. Whether or not it's accurate, who knows? The illustrations are dog shit. But the more and more time goes on, I feel like certain things are starting to add up. But the mention of the Galactic Federation, you know, obviously this is a cult ran on bullshit. But given the timing, it just feels like part of me wonders how much of the lore, let's say, from this KGB Book of Alien Races, which is a book of alien races that details the names of these races, who they are, what they look like, where they come from, a fair amount of chapters on a Galactic Federation, the Council of Five, the Octurians, the Palladians, all that good stuff. I guess whenever I think of Russian communist subversion and how they're getting into the church and getting into all these institutions, part of me wonders if Scientology was perhaps infiltrated with a little bit of this sprinkle of truth regarding a Galactic Federation, or part of me just wonders if L. Ron Hubbard took the inspiration from some earlier piece of sci-fi, and it's a simpler answer than not. But I've always been fixated on the Galactic Federation.
L. Ron Hubbard was a sci-fi author, and the 1930s through 50s was a time in which all the political theorists were talking about how great federalism is as a way of handling a large society. So people believed that in the future, you would either have a single totalitarian government with total control over everything, or you would have a democratic federation. That those were kind of the only two ones. There are a few people speculating about space monarchy, but they believe that any future spacefaring empire would be a federal one.
So you're saying that was basically just a kind of a common trope at the time, is that was the two sci-fi futures we were dealing with. Yeah. Okay, because I guess like beginning of the 2000s, you only get Galactic Federations mentioned in like, say, Star Wars or Dune or something along those lines. So whenever you're getting all these little historical tidbits that mention it, it just kind of feels like there's this period of time where nothing is mentioned, but then it's all mentioned back then. And then you see it in alien documents and you see it with the Scientologist. And for a crazy person like me, I'm like, In
the 50s, almost all sci-fi, it's mentioned the Federation, the Space Federation. And it was just so overdone that people just got really, really bored. I mean, the reason why they started talking about space monarchies was because, okay, come on, we need something other than the Federation.
I hate how simple your explanations are. I'm just like, damn it, that makes sense.
I mean, the reason why George Lucas had the Federation was because that was a big thing in sci-fi when he was a kid. And one of his goals with Star Wars was to have the kind of adventure stories he saw as a kid.
That makes sense. I love sci-fi, and I mean, I know it comes with trauma and dead pets and all the dark shit. But can we just acknowledge for the second that there's a cult on planet Earth with this much power that based itself around science fiction and all these things, and we're having a genuine conversation about this right now. It's horrible as it is, it's neat. I just see these things as neat, and I that is in recognizing the pain and the trauma it causes and everything along the way. But goddamn, it's just
I mean,
what
there's
a
people
guy
who
to
get
sell
out.
Hubbard.
There's people who realize Scientology is an evil cult, that it's horribly abusive, but man, they really love the stories. So they get out,
Like,
they collect the stories, they try to expand on them. Because L. Ron Hubbard, while he was a horribly abusive person, and his writing really sucked by the 80s, he could still design a really cool idea and setting.
so if I were to, and I've been wanting to do this and I haven't found any yet because they're kind of harder to come by at your local thrift shop, but if I were to say 3 to 5 books on Scientology, covering the topics that we've discussed from Scientology itself, if I wanted to go straight to the source and get the best impression of what these people believed and thought on a mythological level, on a meditational level, or just a societal level, like what would you recommend?
Um, well, I have a book titled Scientology A to Xenu, but I don't know where I left it.
A to Xenu. I'm gonna remember that.
By
Is that straight from Scientology?
No, that's by a guy who got out.
Okay.
It's by Chris Shelton and a bunch of he has a whole bunch of videos on YouTube explaining bits of Scientology.
Okay, Chris Shelton.
I think his older stuff is much more calculated than his newer stuff. And he really tried to be detailed and present it fairly from the perspective of people who were in it.
Yeah, because that's what I'm interested in. Because like people can speculate about everything all day, but it's like I'm thinking of this in terms of like Nazis. I'd rather go and read a Nazi book than listen to what someone has to say about their experience or their interpretation of a Nazi. You can just simply get so much more from that. So I'm really glad that a lot of people got out of that and are willing to speak out despite all the terror.
There's more people who left Scientology than are in it.
That's funny. I could see that. That's just a failed experiment hanging on at this point.
Pretty
Lord
much
help them if they lose Tom Cruise.
I mean, and that's getting back to the eras of Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard loved people. He loved being around people. He loved manipulating people. He loved controlling people. So he always wanted to bring in more people. So he made the courses kind of cheap. I mean, yeah, he still bilked people for money, but it wasn't as crazy as it is now. And he designed really complicated rank structures, bureaucratic structures, ways of flattering people. But everything L. Ron Hubbard did was basically to try to get an emotional reaction out of people. David Miscavige is completely different psychologically. David Miscavige really seems to hate people. He hates the people beneath him. He hangs out with Tom Cruise. And I think he really likes Tom Cruise as a person, and Tom Cruise really respects David Miscavige as a leader. Mm-hmm. But most of the people that David Miscavige interacts with from Scientology, he hates. He has more fun hanging around with lawyers and accountants than he does the people who are supposed to look up to him as the spiritual leader.
Sounds kind of like Epstein, hang out with all these different figures who didn't really care for it. It was the money makers. Everyone else was just getting flattery and pageantry.
Well, let's remember Epstein was a spy. Yeah. So he was there to gather information from smart people and powerful people. True. But David Miscavige can choose who he hangs out with. And David Miscavige, in his personal interactions, some people say he's scared of kids. He started working for Scientology when he was a young teenager. And he was really young when he took power. And he really just doesn't seem to like being in events where kids are around.
Sounds like either trauma or guilty conscience.
Well, L. Ron Hubbard did not have the forced abortions policy. David Miscavige introduced that. So I don't know what's going on with that, but David Miscavige definitely has a reputation as hating kids.
Who operates the abortions out of Scientology? Because I can't imagine it'd be going down to local Planned Parenthood, but given how
They
Planned
did.
Parenthood is, I also could. So they
They
did.
did.
How did that
So
partnership look?
it was basically at the local Scientology facility, they gather the number of people who are scheduled for abortions because they'd be punished if they didn't get it. They took a van. I don't know if it was the organization's van, but I think it was usually an unmarked van. Took it to the Planned Parenthood. Boom, abortions happen. They go back. Long-term pro-life observers monitoring Planned Parenthoods noticed it. I saw a footnote about it in a pro-life academic document, but it was considered, yeah, that just happens. It was more of a pro-lifers were interpreting it on the basis of, yeah, shitty organizations do it to cover up rape.
And when you say the women would be punished, what are some examples?
For example, not being allowed to eat in the chow hall, being forced to eat on the floor or eat in a hallway.
So inducing stress, malnutrition, essentially they want that baby to die and that mother to suffer.
Interrupting sleep, taking away pay, forcing people to do nasty cleaning.
That is horrifying.
Scientology, it's always worse than you think.
Jeez. And to know that Planned Parenthood is just like, all right. But I mean, that's kind of their whole thing. It seems like at this point is to just get as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that Planned Parenthood isn't good. I've had to use Planned Parenthood for services before, not abortion related, but like I get that there's good people in there wanting to do good shit. But when your organization has this history, they do a lot of good shit.
But it is an ideologically committed organization, and anytime you have people committed to an ideology, people are tempted to ignore inconvenient facts. And sometimes those inconvenient facts are the most traumatic moments of people's lives.
Yeah, and all you would have to do is tell the people working near Planned Parenthood, be like, these are some battered women from a shelter. Don't worry about them. Don't look at them. We don't want you anywhere around them. Just know they're getting taken care of and they'll be sent on their way. And the staff would probably be like, okay, aren't we helping everybody out today? Good for us.
And I have no idea what the Planned Parenthood staff were told, but I don't think that they were lied to like that. Because the Scientology workers didn't seem to think they were doing anything wrong.
Well, I mean, this is California too. So, I mean, a lot of this. I mean, it's been different time, but
they did that globally. They didn't just force people to have abortions in California.
I got to remember that this isn't just in the United States too. Like other countries out at sea, international waters, like that's just fucking horrifying. Can't even. Yeah. I would not want to live through that. Feel bad for anybody that has.
I mean, it's a totalitarian organization. American society traditionally prizes a degree of individual autonomy. Scientology is not like that. You want to understand what totalitarianism is really like without all the trappings of a foreign culture? That's Scientology.
And the fact that it's examinable within our borders. Like I said, just go to South California and you can just, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. You probably get created with guys with guns, but you could just sit there and look at a pair of binoculars at the facility if you want. It's on the side of a giant mountain. And like I said, the fact that there's natives right on the other side of that, and there's a sharing of the land, it's like you just know the natives are getting fucked over somewhere along the deal. I don't know how that operates. I won't speculate on
I
that,
get
but
the impression
it's
they
a
don't
weird
ask
two people.
questions.
Yeah.
And whenever people try to escape that base, it's usually by running onto the highway.
And for people who I'll post pictures for this, like if you were in the middle of this facility and you tried to leave, we're talking a long road, fences, security cameras, and a few lights. There's no bushes to hide behind. There's no, there's horror stories of people having their cars broken down there and either disappearing or again having men with guns greeting them. Like that would not be a very easy place to escape from, I imagine, or try
I
to.
haven't heard any stories of people disappearing while their cars are broken down there. But greeted by men with guns, abso-freaking-lutely, because Scientology security guards are scared that it's just a pretext to help someone escape.
Yeah. And Scientology don't come at me for anything. I don't have any specifics. I'm allowed to speculate. I'm American.
They've lost their ability to intimidate people anymore. Scientology was still doing illegal stuff to low-level critics as late as 20 years ago. But they couldn't even intimidate some of their high-level critics. Most of the way they dealt with defectors now has been bribery.
Yeah.
So don't be scared of Scientology anymore. They're toothless.
I mean, I kind of figured that in my head, but I'm also just like, man, a lot of crazy people are getting away with a lot of crazy shit right now. I just feel like I'm talking about everybody right now. No, it's just.
But Scientology basically, when they need the goon squad, they don't use Scientologists anymore. They use shady PIs. And they've been burned enough that they can't really afford to beat people up or try to frame them unless it's a really, really important thing. They are under so many lawsuits and so much investigation that they can't do the mafia style stuff they used to.
And good thing for that. I mean, I feel like two really good pop culture examples are Joe Rogan read a note from them on his podcast, and it was pretty laughable just calling him a liar on things he had talked to, I think, Leia Remy about. And then South Park.
They can't even get a consistent spokesman, much less a consistent beat 'em up goon.
I don't think anybody has a consistent spokesman anymore. Like, unless you're talking directly from the word of mouth, like, everyone's PR is just shit these days.
Well, Scientology doctrine demands that they have a single PR guy. They can't
just
do
what?
that. Yeah. A top PR guy.
Does he get a cool name?
Probably, but I can't remember it anymore.
I would say at that point, I would expect a cool title at the very least.
So Scientology can't even fulfill the stuff that they need to keep running. And when they do recruit a guy, it might be for 3-4 years. Okay, so a basic Sea Org recruit, they might be in it for 3-4 years and then just say, fuck this and get out. Okay.
So I have a question for you. So on my channel, as you can probably tell, I like to be speculative. I like to theorize. And a lot of that is because I want to be able to come back and look at things I've theorized or other people have theorized, and I want to see how true they are when the time comes. So I guess I want to see that a little bit from you right now. What do you theorize the end of Scientology would look like? How would it go down?
There are two bits of speculation. That Scientology will end like Jonestown, with Miscavige eventually ordering everybody to commit suicide and people doing it. Or that's just going to be people saying heck no and drift off, and maybe a handful of people take control of the property and get bought out by developers. And that has, at least a couple of years ago, that was that was a serious debate among former Scientologists. Some of them, like Aaron Smith Levin, at the time, believed that Scientology, the members simply wouldn't commit suicide. They're not the Jonestown type of people. And even in Jonestown, most of the people did not voluntarily drink the Kool-Aid. There were people with guns telling them to drink the Kool-Aid. Scientology, yeah, there are people with guns, but it's a handful of guns. They're not going to go along with it. They're going to say, heck no, I'm not going to be part of this, and walk away. There are some people like Chris Shelton who believed that, yes, people are fanatical enough to drink Kool-Aid if ordered to. I personally think that Scientology basically killed off its next generation. The people who remain are basically childless, and they don't believe in Scientology anymore. They'll basically keep it for its branding, and the handful of true believers will basically be shoved out the door, and they'll sell off the property in a few decades.
Do you think that any of the remnants would ever reorganize into something similar or something new? On to the next scam?
There have been people trying to create independent Scientology, and mostly it fails.
Can you give us a few examples?
Well, the guy who ran the Church of Scientology in Jerusalem, was it Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? I don't know. I think it's Jerusalem.
It's got to be a bad place for something like that.
Well, I mean, you have a bunch of secular Jews who basically are enmeshed in American pop culture, and Scientology has, for better or worse, been part of American pop culture for decades.
Okay. It
didn't seem to be very busy, but they were most famous for a fire, an arson attack that Scientology claimed was a hate crime against them, well, was actually insurance fraud. Not by Scientology, by the lawyer who got a cut of rebuilding commissions. And eventually the guy who ran it got so sick of David Miscavige jerking everyone around that he went independent. And I think he simply gave up on it a few years later.
Wait, so David Miscavige was involved? This is the Israel one, right?
Right.
So they're independent, but I guess you can't be independent without permission. So you're not technically independent, you're just a branch, kind of. Is that right?
Right. There was something like a franchise system going on. There were organizations that were directly controlled, and then there were franchises that were allowed to provide services up to a certain level.
What freedoms were these offshoot groups? What were they offered? Because I feel like if you're doing something like that, you'd want to do it with more permission, more freedom in mind, more flexibility for whatever. What would the reasoning be?
The franchises were allowed to keep a cut of the proceeds and allowed to administer services their way for a bit.
Okay. So they're more in control of the finances.
Yes. But there was a meeting back in the 80s in which David Miscavige yanked them back and said, you do it our way, and we want a bigger cut. And that basically killed the franchise system, but a few people were hanging on in small countries.
Goddamn. Are there any that are still active?
Probably. But
nothing like
I think
even
the
worth
people are
mentioning.
Still active. I think the people are still active are doing it more out of ideology and part-time rather than because it's a going concern.
So speaking of ideology, I was listening to, I could be wrong, I think his name is like Adam Smith, maybe even Adam Smith Levine or something like that.
Aaron Smith Levin?
Yes. Yeah, I was listening to him this morning talk with Lex Fridman, and he seemed pretty convinced that up to a certain extent, with him knowing that certain things were bullshit and that past like OTC 9 and 8, there wasn't really much there, that he believed that David Miscavige was a true believer. in what L. Ron Hubbard created, whereas L. Ron Hubbard might have been a little more, bullshit with it. What's your perspective on that? Do you see him as a follower, or as someone who saw that it was bullshit and is now taking control of the bullshit?
I think L. Ron Hubbard knew it was bullshit, but he eventually came to believe it a little bit about 3-4 years before he died. I think that David Miscavige believed it for the first 3-4 years, and when he actually had to review everything and make his own changes, he realized it was all bullshit. So I don't think he believes it. He just doesn't have much of a real world framework to interpret the world other than stuff he knows is bullshit.
See, I feel like if that's the case, then he's a good comparison for a lot of these activists or a lot of these higher ups in these, woke activist fields that are still hanging on for dear life, even though they know it's bullshit. At that point, it would just be either A, to fool yourself, or B, to cover up for what you've done.
And one of the observations is that auditing is supposed to be the main healing mechanism for Scientology. And David Miscavige developed changes that completely destroyed it. But those were the signature changes he made. And David Miscavige clearly does not understand how to organize things. And his signature moves basically destroyed the core healing purpose of the organization. He has to pretend to believe it, or to believe that he did the right thing, if only to avoid coming into awareness that he destroyed his power base. Not only is he evil, he is incompetent. And I don't think he can bear being thought of as an incompetent weakling.
What are some of the changes that he initiated within the movement, and how would you compare them to communist structures? Or maybe even say something like Antifa or BLM? Because I feel like there's a lot of comparisons to be drawn with the church and modern day politics. What are your thoughts on that? What are some of the things he introduced that just shat on everything?
Well, I think Hubbard himself already had totalitarian instincts. He would try to direct his followers into, quote, fighting back by, say, writing threatening letters to people in psychiatry departments, or by going into a medical school and putting up obnoxious posters. But that was small school stuff. It wasn't trying to do a hit and run like we started to see in the 80s. Under Hubbard, he basically tried to take in people from the general society and then isolate them and fill them with a whole bunch of, the enemy is all bad, but there are a tiny handful of people. So yeah, I know there's people who say this is all a con, but they're just dupes for these really evil, bad people who are pulling the strings. Mm-hmm. But Hubbard at least tried to mimic the sorts of expert and moral authority the rest of the society had. And he tried to pretend that the totally evil enemies that people should do anything to stop were a tiny handful of men. And the result was there were people who were willing to kill for Hubbard, but Hubbard held them back because he didn't want to go to prison. And I don't think he really wanted to hurt anybody. Hubbard was a con man. He wasn't a killer.
I almost get a sense of watching footage from Hubbard and in recognizing that a lot of this was notorious and that there was malicious intent. It kind of seemed like he was just having fun a lot of the time. Like it was his playground in a way. That's kind of the sense I get.
One, he wanted to seem like he was having fun because he put forth the message that if you really believe this stuff, you should be happy. Okay. So he had to fake having fun, even if he wasn't. But I think he also had fun because he enjoyed controlling and manipulating people. He was a classic.
That's the kind of fun you keep to yourself, basically.
He was a classic grandiose narcissist, and he attracted a lot of people who wanted something to believe in.
Kind of Trumpian in a lot of ways.
I would say, yeah. Grandiose narcissism can look very similar, even if it's more justified in other cases. Mm-hmm. So if things go really bad, yeah, I can see Trump falling into many of the same habits that L. Ron Hubbard did.
Yeah,
but Trump,
and I mean mostly like in terms of like showmanship, like presentation, like, you know, like so I'm very much softer on Donald Trump now because I realize a lot of what I was fearful of there wasn't to be fearful of, but there's just something about that showmanship that I see that, you know, like we were talking earlier about how that could be captivating to a lot of people. I could see that same thing with him.
Trump loves the applause of the crowd. Mm-hmm. L. Ron Hubbard loved the adulation from his audience. That's common to both of them. And the speaking style of just going on extemporaneously whenever they get a favorable audience reaction is common to both of them. They did not plan their remarks very tightly. They just said something, saw if the audience was receptive, and then just kept going.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds fair.
So if you listen to the raw recordings of stuff Hubbard said, he just meanders all over the place. Kind of like Trump. So yeah, there is some similarities in how they love the response of the crowd. But David Miscavige is not like that. He does not seem comfortable in a public speaking environment other than the victory over the IRS speech. That was probably his proudest moment, and he kept on playing that clip hundreds of times to people. There's some executives who say, you know, maybe we're just soaking too much money from our members. They can't afford to do our stuff anymore. And then, no, I know what I'm doing. Also, you all have to watch my my victory speech again.
How long's the speech? Because I think I want to put it in here. I don't think I've seen it.
About 2 hours. It's fascinating psychologically, and for the way he depicts the really complicated battle with the IRS. But it's not short.
I might cherry pick that one because like I definitely don't have a problem dropping like an hour-long interview on my channel. 2 hours might be pushing it, but yeah, I want to see what that looks like because so I just love the straight from the source stuff. Like this morning, for example, I was listening to the music from Scientology because I just got that thought in my head. I'm like, I've never listened to their music, and I found a 21-minute album with music allegedly written and composed by L. Ron Hubbard.
Oh, that one.
It was one of the greatest pieces of music I'd ever listened to. It was like the synthwavy 80s mixed with 90s. Like, that's the kind of music you want to listen to going into an alien future. I was about it. And yes, I'm going to add it to this video at the very end because, you know, even monsters can create works of art. Hitler, great architecture. You know, Kevin Spacey, great Lex Luthor. But I like the blocky look. There's something about the blocky look. I know it looks horrible, but I also like it at the same time. I don't know.
Look, Scientology pretends that it's scientific or spiritual, but really they're a bunch of nerdy artists. They like the imagery, and they think about the imagery, and they don't ask if the math adds up. They don't ask if these ideas match up. They don't ask if the results are as advertised. They like the idea, and they let their imagination run free. They create beautiful art, even if it has no bearing on reality.
And at the risk of pissing off my audience, bless them. Goddamn bless them.
I mean, it's just like... I mean, it would be nice in a nerdy sort of way if it wasn't an abusive cult.
Yeah, no, keeping that in there. But no, it's just like I was listening to one of the songs too, and it's the one where they're sitting there with the choir. And if you go back and look at the video, half the people there aren't in Scientology anymore. But my grandfather, he led First Baptist Church down in Odessa, Texas when I was a kid. And it was the exact same type of choir music that the church would play. I was having flashbacks to childhood, just like, whoa. That one was tackier than the others, but yeah, you could see the hippy dippy kind of bleeding through a little bit, mixed with the religious elements. Like, I guess that's why Tom Cruise is like their main guy, because he's head creative.
I mean, they really went after creative types of people. And their advertising director, their head of advertising decades ago was consciously targeting creative people. And
Jeez.
I mean, whatever else, their Hubbard's birthday parties are really big on art history, even if they're not really big on anything else.
I feel like art and creativity in its like raw rebellious form, it's meant to evoke, it's meant to agitate. And I think that's why you're seeing, because like a lot of people in Antifa and BLM, creatives, a lot of people in the trans cult, creatives, you know, a lot of people in the satanic elite putting on the fucking portal festivals, creatives. Like certain types of people seem to be more manipulative because they probably because they're more open to their views, they're more open to exploring things that may or may not be good for them, real. There's at least the openness to accepting things. So it's just kind of scary to see the extent to which creatives are targeted, or like the music industry. I mean, even Taylor Swift is coming out painted completely satanic and gray and looking like she just fucked Rob Zombie. Like, creatives are very suggestible people, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And it's very easy to notice who's being preyed on in these cases.
Well, it's been an old observation that poets quickly turn into tyrants. It's very easy to get an image in your head that makes beautiful sense in theory, but which is hellish to implement in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And if you aren't willing to think about just how messy reality is, trying to force that image that result on other people can be extraordinarily abusive.
Like Hitler, I mean, some of his landscapes, he was probably thinking, I just want a future with pretty neighborhoods and German shepherds running around, and wouldn't this big blocky building be nice downtown? And reality, utopian thinking, a little bit of heroin, a lot of bit of power.
I think he was
That...
mostly on cocaine.
Oh, was it cocaine? I thought it was heroin.
I mean,
Oh, I guess you'd have to be
might
more
have had some
jittery on
heroin,
cocaine.
but for a while he was on cocaine and then switched to meth.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah, drugs and creativity. I mean, drugs do a lot. I mean, we've had discussions about that so far. It can warp everything. My brain is still warped from the drugs. I haven't taken any hard drugs in years. Still fried. Like, mix that with power, and that's a horrifying, horrifying thing. And creative vision, because creativity can be a scary thing.
Yeah. Okay, I don't remember his name, but a guy wrote the book The Oedipus Complex about how tyrants use architecture and art to implement their will. And sometimes that's wide open spaces. So, you know, Tiananmen Square, you know how the palace is so offset from the general city that it's kind of impossible for ordinary people to have any sense of unity in such a big open space. That makes it really hard for ordinary people to get the sense of community that it takes to rebel against government.
So it plays psychological mind games with everything down to the architecture, basically.
Yep. And Hitler was really into art. One, he was already an art guy, but he also carefully went through catalogs to try to make his movement look tough and intimidating. He designed buildings in order to create a psychological effect in the people who went inside.
Mm-hmm.
His
You always
rally,
feel itty bitty. Like every building or painting that you look at, you just imagine looking straight up at.
it was
I think that's what always gets
designed.
me about it.
It was designed for a sense of grandiosity that would make the individual look small.
I could see that. I never thought to consider the psychological mind games in terms of the architecture, because I have always said, and this isn't to say that I admire dictatorship or any of the horrors and atrocities that come with it, but dictators truly have the best architecture. Sorry, the best architecture, in a lot of cases, the best uniforms. And that's not to say it's good. It's just to say there's something like aesthetically appealing to it. Like as an artist, there's something to where I'm like, that stands out from the crowd.
I will agree that there is an aesthetic they're going for. They're maximizing that aesthetic. And there's at least a part of us that responds to it favorably. I mean, I would still rather live in an American apartment block than a communist era apartment block. But I will say there is something with being in an apartment block that houses 800 people as opposed to just 100. Mm-hmm. The grandiosity, the scale has an effect.
There's an energy change. You know, it's like going, like I said, an apartment complex to even just like a suburb with a couple of houses. You feel less constricted, a little more open. You notice the nature a little bit more. You can breathe. Apartment living, I've always just felt suffocated and not small, but cramped. Even like having people on both sides of you living, touching, I've never ever enjoyed that. It always just makes you feel like that. But then also your life for me at least felt very cramped. At least how I psychologically responded to that versus now I'm in the suburbs and I'm like, oh, it's kind of nice.
And that's what a lot of tyrannical architecture was like for ordinary residents. It forced a lot of people close together at a scale in which you would just feel dwarfed by the size of the buildings, by the masses of the people going around. It wasn't, oh, I see my neighbor, I can go up and talk to him for a bit. And nobody else will be there or complain. But if I stop in the middle of the walkway in one of these old communist apartment complexes that say, get out of the way, let us through.
I'm still in an equal amount of awe, but I certainly have less respect for the design's choices now, because that makes a lot of sense. Because like I said, now it's a little scarier, but it's just that for me, at least looking in, not having that perspective, not knowing what it's meant to do, I'm just like, it's just like it stretches to heaven. Like some of those buildings could just go all the way up, 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 up. And how the hell would you climb it? How the hell did they make that? How the hell did they do that? Just like so many questions that get involved with just a simple shape. A lot of times it was just rectangles, but very unique. You didn't see a lot of other countries doing that, or any, really.
There are also goals for some of this architecture in the lifestyle for the people in it that were different than in other countries. So for a number of universities in Moscow, they wanted it so that you could theoretically spend your entire life indoors. So you come in as a student, you sleep indoors, you go to the cafeteria indoors, you walk to class in a tunnel, you use a ping pong table or an exercise bike indoors. You go to class indoors. Theoretically, you could spend 4 years studying and not go outside.
I feel like we're getting closer to that in America. Where now that COVID's over, they're just trying to use emergency and tragedy, and it's just like, shut it all down. Just go inside. We'll make it convenient for you. History repeats.
So one of the defining features of life under communism was just how isolated people were into their little silo. They lived and worked in a certain area. They lived and worked in a different area. You didn't mix very much.
Everyone's segregated into their own purpose, their own cogs.
And that's easier with big buildings rather than little ones.
Yeah, it makes me think of when I was a kid. My first job, I worked at a meat processing plant down in South Texas. We did like Tyson meats and Jack Daniels meats and all that. And yeah, just a big flat rectangular building, and the meat packers go over here and the cooks go over here and the barbecue sauce people go over here and the packing people go over here. And even during lunch, you never would really see them just in passing and be like, howdy, how you doing? And then On your way. So just imagining society setting up like that, I am kind of starting to see more of that being a reality here, because
And one
everyone just has a sense of sticking to their own and staying inside, minding their own business.
and one of the powerful features of life under communism was, in many ways, it was a very class-driven society, not based on what your official position was, but by what organization you worked for. And
So,
the architecture reflected that.
so what would can you give me an example of what different architecture might look like for different classes?
So if you were a metallurgical worker, I mean, in the early Soviet Union, you got paid pretty decently, but quite often you would be housed in not very pretty buildings. If you're a military officer, you could go to a theater that was decorated in neoclassical style, even if it was built under communism. The fancier the building, the more powerful the organization you were working for. So unofficially,
Just like America.
so a metallurgical worker might get more money, but they wouldn't have the same permission as a military officer. So you want to buy something nice? You get permission to go to the foreign currency store. If you have foreign currency, you can buy stuff, or you can change your money and get the foreign currency to buy stuff. Who had access to those stores? Party members, military officers, a few scientific members of the scientific elite. Ordinary people could not do that. So you're down on the collective farm. You go to a store, they might have shirts 1 month, they won't have it the next. You live in a big city. You're a military officer, or you're an academic. You have permission to buy stuff in the stores.
I feel like while we haven't fully got to the financial permissions quite yet, I feel like a government cryptocurrency might start regulating that. Just the idea of everybody sticking to their own class. I think a lot of people in my generation a lot of people I know work in the restaurant industry, so I feel like this could work for a couple of people. Because I'm not talking shit when I say this, but a lot of people say you're like a cook or a dishwasher. Your circle's not really going to exceed a bartender, another cook, or another dishwasher, or maybe a cashier over here. Everyone recognizes that people in a kitchen operate differently than people in retail, per se. And all those people operate differently than someone in a factory, and all those people operate differently than truckers. Some people might be able to cross the aisles a little easier than others, but with people not really extending their circle, the bubble stays small. So, and like even down to finances, a lot of people in my generation look down on people with money or of a certain class. So they think either they're above it or they're beneath it, and they don't even make the initiative to engage. So it's almost like the societal effect and the psychological effect is already in place. Now all it needs is the financial systems in place to regulate where you go and how you operate and what you can spend your money on and how. Like everything else is already
And
there, I feel like.
and if they do that, then we're going to end up in a much more dysfunctional society, because you need people crossing those social barriers, talking to each other, socializing, in order to realize what the heck is going on.
Yeah. I'm still listening. I'm just fixing my HDMI real quick.
So you get situations where stuff is happening on the ground. The people on the ground see it. But the people further away in an office have no idea what the heck's going on. Or you can have a situation where so there's a train line. The mechanical engineer knows, oh, this bit of track is going to fail in the next couple months. We need to do something about it. But the driver has no idea. The people at the stations have no idea. The executives have no idea. So there's just not a lot of communication between people. And the more that they're just siloed, the more they need official mechanisms of communication, the more vulnerable it is to just one bad idiot.
Yeah, and that kind of fits in line with earlier conversations we were having of people just not feeling like they can address anything in their workplace and just feeling like they can't even bring up anything. Like I said, I work in a restaurant and there's daily incidents where all it would take to solve is for the person to go to our boss or a manager and to deal with it. And this is no shit to my managers or anything. I love all the people I work for. But there's a sense of, well, we can't go and tell them because nothing will get done, or it will just fall on deaf ears, or corporate's just going to tell them no. So most people will not address anything. Now, those things have come down to physical concerns, sexual harassment concerns, pedophilic concerns, drug use concerns. There's been a lot of concerns where you think any normal person would get a boss involved. They don't. And again, that's not just talk shit on any of my bosses, because I think a couple of them watch this, and I love every single one of you guys. But that is the reality that we face in this society, and it's not just where I work; it's anywhere that I've worked in the past few years. Because I job hopped a minute before I found the place that I'm most comfortable with. I hear it from other people at their jobs too, and again, it's like talking about anxiety and PTSD and having this language for mental health. A lot of people just say, well, I'm too anxious to bring it up, or I don't know how to bring it up. And they don't have the social skills adequate enough, and at least in their head, to even act upon bringing up a grievance. That's horrifying.
That is something I have seen elsewhere. And I see a lot of ordinary transportation workers who have concerns about how reliable are these systems. And then you talk to people in an office and they have no idea what's going on. They expect, oh, if there's a problem, it'll be in a written report, right? Right? The office people have no idea just how many judgments go into, do we report this or not?
And I think a lot of society, it seems like in the workplace before, there was a lot of, you're doing more than your fair share, therefore more's getting done. Now people are doing less and expecting everything to be somebody else's job. And because of that, there's a lot of pitfalls that are happening in a lot of different areas, I feel like, because there's just an expectation, like I said, of others to do it.
Well, there's another aspect to it. A lot of the safety systems rely on someone speaking up and saying something. It requires people being direct. If you have a change in communication norms where directness is no longer viewed as friendly, but viewed as potentially hostile, those safety systems that rely on being direct aren't going to work as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm anxious. I don't know how to communicate this in an indirect and therefore friendly way. Therefore, I won't communicate it. The system is assuming that you're going to communicate it directly.
Mm-hmm.
If you change those communication norms, the safety systems stop working.
Yeah, no, I feel like, because, you're talking about as large scale as like this being as big as like the Department of Transportation. And I'm sitting here just thinking of like this restaurant that I work in, a lot of these newbies coming in, on top of the anxiety and not being able to say anything. One good example I could bring that I tell you time and time again, because people think I'm being mean with the newbies, but these kids really do need a fucking firm fire boot in their ass or a fire lit under it. They will just like drop a glass, shatter it, goes everywhere. And then it's like it doesn't even register in their faces, and they just walk away.
What?
All the time. And people are at my work like, why are you always so bitchy about the newbies? I'm like, because you keep hiring people, and you're not checking to see if they have any qualifications. You're hiring every 17 and 18-year-old out there asking for a job. But you could tell them 1,000,001 times, mash down the garbage, make sure the plates are orderly, don't turn this place into a disaster. Oh my God. It doesn't register. The younger generation every year just gets worse and worse and worse. And now it's been like every new hire.
But
and they're all
broken
kids.
glass is a safety hazard. You don't want to be stepping on broken glass.
They just walk away. It's gone to the point where I walk away because they expect someone else to do it, to where I just go, nope. and I just go to my car and I smoke a little bit of weed and I try to recuperate and then come back to do my job, because they expect their hands to be held through everything. And then you can explain it to them and it'll be like, oh, I don't know how to do that, or no one ever taught me that, as you're actively teaching them. And I feel like everybody who works in just like a lower end American work environment right now is probably like cheering and agreeing with us right now, because it is just consistently, and they all want to bitch about the customers, which, yes, the customers are worse than ever before. I won't even touch that. But the workers are worse than ever before too, and it doesn't help in making the customers feel better, because they sit around, they play on their phones, they're walking around with headphones when they should be serving tables. Then it's like, and on the flip side, you have management that doesn't feel like they can control their team. Again, if they're listening to this, I love you guys. This is something I've talked to you guys about. This is every American workplace. This is not just special to where I work. I'm not name dropping. I'm not talking shit. I'm just saying that there is an active problem in this country. And anyone who goes to a McDonald's or a Taco Bell or a KFC or an Albertsons or an HEB or a Walmart can see it with their own damn eyes. Find me one like younger worker at Walmart not walking around with one of those damn iPhones in their hand. You can't find it. And then try to find that person when you need them.
I mean, when I did visit an industrial town in Wisconsin, the workers seemed pretty attentive compared to what I saw in DC.
Like small towns and stuff like that, they still get it.
And it's an industrial town, so there's more of a history of if you fuck up, there is a massive safety issue. You don't play around on your phone when the freight train is coming through.
There's no sense of consequence anymore, is really what I think it is. It's all just slaps on the wrist. And I'm not gonna pretend I'm the perfect worker. I am by far. I smoke pot at my job. I just zone out. I listen to my podcast. I still get my shit done. Can I do it a little better from time to time? Yeah, but I don't do that type of shit that I am seeing from these kids coming into the workplace. It's like your parents never grounded you. They never told you to go outside. They never told you to put down the phone. You were babysat by TikTok, and it is showing 100%. And not to mention, on top of them just being the most uneducated generation. And again, I know it's by design. I don't want to talk shit, but a lot of these kids are just, they're denser than a pile of bricks. They don't know history. They don't know much of anything outside of what their phone tells them. Like, they don't pay attention to training. And again, I've worked at gas stations, I've worked at restaurants, I've worked at call centers, I worked at a national polling firm. I did election polling during the Biden and Trump election. That was a fucking nightmare. But those people ain't much better. Like, it's just a nightmare through and through. Every system is just this coddled generation coming through, and then this older generation being like, well, I don't know what to do. Or that same sense that a parent has of, well, I don't want to do to my kid what my parent did to me. Well, I don't want to do to my employees what my boss used to do to me. Even though that hard-ass boss probably had a pretty good point in what he was doing. And yes, a lot of bosses for a long time were executing that poorly and abusing their workers. They see all forms of assertiveness as abuse, or fear of being perceived as abuse. And for a lot of places like the West Coast, a lot of the workplace rules put in
justified anger and abuse.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, you froze up a little bit here. Okay, we're back.
I mean, I've noticed that some people can't tell the difference between justified anger and abuse. So if I've seen situations in which someone shouted at someone who was being unsafe, and that was treated as a personal affront as opposed to a remove the safety hazard as directly as possible.
Mm-hmm. That's how the West Coast operates. Like, I know you're seeing a lot of similarities on the East, but Washington, Oregon, California, that's just what it is. You know, you can't. Oh God, here I am about to say it. You can't bring up anything to anyone, is what I was about to say. You should, and I do, and people think sometimes that I'm a dick or an asshole for it, and I get called a dick and an asshole for it, but it's like, no, I can't just sit here and watch these constant abuses, all this neglect, all this oversight. And like I said, I work in a really good place, but there's just sometimes things go on and they happen in such mass quantity all at once that it's like, okay, someone has to say something. I'm going to let that person be me because I'm used to getting shit. And then a lot of the times, kind of like a lot of these people are afraid, it doesn't fall through.
So here's a situation in the restaurant I used to work in. There is a server. He works slow, just consistently slowly. And one day he showed up about 30 minutes late. And I don't know if he was drunk or high, but he just didn't seem to be able to focus on serving tables. And he had 2 tables that day. So here's 2 women who come in, and I'm just going through. I'm making sure all the tables have been bussed, and I see this couple here. They've been here for 40 minutes, and nobody has served them. What the heck's going on? I go find the guy, and then he shows up, barely takes their order, and he doesn't deliver the order to the kitchen for 15 minutes. So what do I do? Do I leave these customers just sitting there with no food? They're wondering if, are we racist or something? Because why isn't anybody taking their order?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I've seen
or
that
do
happen a
I
couple of times.
or do I complain to the manager and say, hey, this guy isn't doing the basics of what it takes to be a server? Because the manager didn't catch the guy not serving that table. I did. That's not my job. And I don't want to get this guy in trouble, but I also don't want customers to feel disrespected.
And what a lot of these Gen Z brats would call that these days is snitch culture. You're snitching. You're ruining somebody else's work experience. Who are you to tell this person how they should do their job? And I mean, just the beginning part of that story, that's happened a few times this week where I've worked. And I have gone to the reviews on the restaurant before, and there was one where this woman was just like, yeah, I didn't recognize that look. First of all, this part was on her. She's like, I went in and I sat myself at the table. Okay, where you don't do that where we work, so obviously you're gonna get shitty looks based off that. But then she took the rest of that dismissal. You could tell the way she wrote it that the employees were kind of giving her a fuck you look and waiting a few minutes just to see if she would leave. But she 100% internalized that as racism, and yeah, I think that's where you're getting a lot of this too. Is just people treating each other like shit, and then other people interpreting it just how they will, and how they will a lot of the times comes down on race or trans or gay or whatever.
And in this case, it was the women sat where they were told to by the front desk people.
That's just not right. Like, people just want to go and eat and have a nice time. You really can't have that anymore. And you know, I would probably be bitchy if I worked front of house too, because I have. But here's the thing, that's why I don't. That's why I work in the dish pit, because I know I can just smoke some weed, listen to a podcast, jam out to some tunes, bullshit with the kitchen workers. It's a better environment back there. You can kind of just say whatever you want within reason. That's just not my environment. But a lot of these kids, they don't even know how to search for a job, or they don't know where they're happy, or how to even look for what makes them happy, or what would at least make them not bitter. Like, you don't have to be happy, but these kids don't realize you can go somewhere where you're just existing. That's kind of how I feel with where I work. I'm not happy. I'm not upset. I just kind of am. And I know I can show up to work and not say, fuck this place and want to leave every day. Sometimes that's just what you need, but these kids don't realize it. They just go for whatever they got. If the pay is good, they want to hang in for as long as possible because they can't lose that pay. In which case, you kind of can blame the economy in certain instances up to an extent, but like we had in earlier conversations mentioned, it also leads to a lot of this anti-capitalism resentment because they're confusing this complete economic structure with their shitty experience at their job, of which they have more control over their own fate than they seem to realize.
That it's as if the critical thinking skills of people has just been scooped out.
Kind of like how I said once we were all Charles Manson, now we're all in Scientology now. We're all in just this one big cult, just
I
kind of
mean,
chipping away at our own reasoning and our
I
own.
mean, these mass social movements in which people try to apply social pressure to get people to pretend to go along with it does seem very cult-like. But what I think has surprised me the most is just so many people just going along with it and not really asking themselves, huh, is this true? Because a lot of this stuff doesn't stand up to scrutiny, but it just goes on because people aren't asking questions.
Well, and it's like in questioning where it's true. There was one person I was talking to who was going off about how their black trans friend was just so over the moon that Stonewall was started by a black trans woman. And when I looked at her and I was like, no, it was started by Fred Sargent as gay liberation. And I kind of broke down the history.
Well,
There was
he
just
was
this
there. He
pause.
wasn't the first person to do anything, but
Yeah, she was like at a nearby park or hanging out with friends or something. And like when I told this person that, though, their brain just kind of, and then the response I got was, oh, well, I'm just not going to tell my friend that because that would ruin everything for them. And I just walked away. And I was just like, what the fuck? And that just happens all the time. It's, well, this would shake the boat a little bit if I were to even mention this. So in order to keep things going as things have been, and to keep the birds chirping, and to not keep my heart racing, and to not have to think about the reality of the world around me, I'm just gonna bubble it out. And in that, where that could be a moment to like educate someone and be like, hey, actually this is the real history, and it might be good to know just in case, you ever see the actual founder get assaulted or something, and you can pin down who that is. That moment of education and bridge building and just coming together as humans and saying, wow, isn't it wacky the things we believe? This is the actual history. Oh my God. It's like we know something that everybody else doesn't know. Let's go tell everybody else too, because now we know what actually happened. And that's how humans are supposed to operate. That's just dead for a lot of people.
I mean, there's the old philosophical question of would you rather be right or happy? And oftentimes, if you pick happy,
Happy for most.
you don't actually end up happy because you have to keep on lying to yourself to maintain the illusion, and lies end up having a price.
Mm-hmm. It's like the World Economic Forum slogan, you will own nothing and you will be happy. It's like, how do they get you to the point of owning nothing? They convince you the entire time that you're fucking happy, all the way to that point where you don't have anything to your name. No property, no autonomy, no control over your destiny. But goddamn, if you won't be happy, they're training us to be happy to that point, the elite.
I generally view the World Economic Forum as a bunch of posers dancing around on a stage, pretending they're important. But the impulse that they have of controlling everything and hoping to still be a rich and pleasant society is just absurd. The more you control the people who make the decisions, the more likely those decisions are going to go haywire. Because whenever you have someone who has to make a decision, they have to ask, am I going to get in trouble for doing the right thing? And the more they are dependent on political authorities that have no idea what's going on, the more likely they're going to focus on self-preservation as opposed to keeping the system running. I mean, it's not for nothing that Soviet aviation tended to be really unsafe. And it's not for nothing that we're starting to see a heck of a lot more safety issues in American transportation.
Daily at this point. I mean, god damn, like the idea of flying right now just sounds horrifying. I'm not gonna fearmonger, and I went on a plane not too long ago, but like just watching all these planes fall and hit record amounts of turbulence and having parts just completely yank out and people sucked in and then people losing their shit and just opening the door of their own accord. It's like,
I mean, surviving turbulence is a good thing. That was proof that at least whoever made that plane and maintained it did something right. But is that a new plane or is that an old plane before the recent loss of managerial quality?
and we're talking about the Singapore one, right? Are we talking about
Right.
the same one? Okay. Just for the audience to know. Yeah, it's so I haven't looked too deeply into that one because in my head I just look at that and I'm like, fuck another one. Just like shootings after a certain extent a couple years ago, it just got to the point where it's like, another shooting, I guess, another plane falling out of the sky. And that normalization is even scarier.
I mean, defenders of Boeing are pointing to the Singapore flight because that actually is proof that a plane can survive some pretty tough stuff. Now, that doesn't necessarily help Boeing because an old plane maintained by a very professional airline is going to survive a heck of a lot more than a new plane maintained by a terrible airline. But
yeah, and I mean, they can kill all the whistleblowers they want. It's not hiding the things falling out of the sky at this point. I mean, we're at 2-3 dead whistleblowers now, is it?
I only know of the second one dying. I didn't know more died.
It might just be 2. I can't think of a third, but yeah, it's not a. You should be doing that whenever the cameras aren't on you already. You know, where the name Boeing isn't idiots.
I keep on saying it. These people are idiots.
I think I've named that, and that's what this episode's name's gonna be. These people are fucking idiots. Because, like I said, it is such a feel good thing to know that real life villains are just as dumb as a lot of the villains in movies, and that therefore is their greatest weakness, and that's the Achilles heel, and that's how we can overcome. It just sucks that it has to result in like hundreds of thousands of dead bodies and exploded vehicles and dozens of polluted rivers and entire ecosystems seemingly wiped out and satanic corporate deals. It comes at the expense of so much that there really does have to come a point where it's like everybody needs to recognize that we do live in this world. We do live in a comic book. We do live in a movie. Yes, that it is still reality, but until everybody accepts it, it's just going to keep going and going and going. And the fact that it can keep going like this is horrifying. This is like Bezmov said, in the 80s, everything that was happening with American subversion was already overfulfilled. So we're like almost 40 years deep into that. And we really can just look by with anything.
I mean, I see it like an infection. If you've got a fairly healthy immune system, you're probably going to survive most infections. Okay, you might get a fever, you might feel bad for a while, but you'll survive it just fine. If your immune system is compromised, you're going to have a heck of a lot harder time. And I think our social immune system has been compromised by people not feeling free to say something, people not feeling like they can research stuff, trusting the experts too much. Oh, this guy who's a professor says this landholding system is oppressive. I guess he's right. He's a professor. Instead of just asking, okay, what's your reasoning? What's your economic theory? What's your legal theory? When people don't feel like they can bring up concerns or questions, the complex mechanisms of our society break down. Free speech and asking questions are our social immune system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the amount of ridicule that goes for people that do too, to where it's like, yeah, I know I'm not the smartest person on the planet, but to have people I've had my life look at me and be like, well, you're not a doctor, you're not a psychiatrist, why the hell would you even listen to that person? Or you don't even understand what they're saying, or this is a misinterpretation. And it's like, okay, well, just because you aren't catching what's being said, and I certainly don't understand everything, you name drop and you do some instances sometimes where I'm not in my head, but I'm going to have to look back at this video and go do myself the Google because I don't know everything. But there's a level of ridicule that comes with that shit that gets really fucking old. And it's like they say, fascism starts in the household. It starts with your friends. It starts with your circles. And people like me, because I've talked to people like me, very few in between, are ridiculed, are treated like fucking shit, are treated like we're psychotic while we watch everybody around us fall apart and fall prey to this stupid shit, while we're just trying to say, hey, you're going to suffer more if you don't fucking listen. And it's not to say that we know everything, it's to say that we're paying attention and that a lot of people fucking aren't. And the more you don't pay attention, the crazier it's going to fucking seem by the time you do. Because between here and next June, we're going to have over a dozen new atrocities. We're going to have more natural disasters. We're going to have more fucking alien videos. We're going to have more everything. And that's another month you're going to have to fucking catch up on.
Well,
Sorry.
a lot of people berate others in order to make it look like they know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the classic thing of, I have no idea what's going on. But if I'm acting angry at other people, I look like I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who get into power are frauds who don't know stuff, but they get promoted because they look like they know stuff because they're berating and accusing other people.
And then younger, more aspiring people who are looking up to that and they're thinking that's what a leader is. They're taking on those reptilian qualities. Let's put that in those terms. And they're not getting a real sense of what a leader is. They're getting a facade, they're getting a play, they're getting a show. Like, if you want to know what a leader is, you don't really look to I don't look to Luke Skywalker to dictate my moral authority. I might look to somebody like Jordan Peterson. I can look at something like a movie or a book and be like, this is inspirational, there's a lot to take from this, but like, you have to base things in real life. I don't know where I'm going off on that, but you just got to be people just got to be real with this shit. You have to want to investigate. You have to want to look into these things. Until
And
people want to, they're not going to.
I think a lot of people are scared to investigate, either because, well, I'm not going to understand it, so I'm not even going to try, or it's, I'm going to investigate it. I'm probably going to get something wrong and I'm going to be socially humiliated for my mistake, so I'm not going to risk it. And that's just how things keep on relying on the same handful of people who grow either more and more incompetent or a dwindling number of real experts who end up getting displaced by the incompetence because nobody's trained to follow them.
And I think people got to realize too, if you're really waking up every day feeling like the moon's hanging over your head and like you're going to die and every day could be your last, and you're really living in this existential place of fear where you feel like you can't open your mouth, isn't it better to open your mouth and get punched in the face or shot or yelled at, or any number of things is so much better than just being locked down and not being able to feel like you can say anything? Because the thing is, at least what I've realized, you could say more than you think, and that more people will respond well to it than you think. And I've been hit, I've been choked, I've been screamed at, I've been called a dick, I've been called a fucking asshole. Things don't always go great when you open your mind. But I left getting choked and hit with a smile on my face. I got called an asshole with a smile on my face, and I meant it. Looked at that person and said, here, have the other cheek. Because it is so much better to live in truth than in bullshit. And those people that are going to throw themselves at you are living in bullshit. And fuck them.
And something that people who complained about problems in communist systems faced was, you complain too much, you're going to get disappeared, you're going to get beaten, you're going to get hurt. But if you don't say something, you're just cowering it. You're not doing anything. You're just letting everybody else down. And it's better to speak up and help people than be a coward and be silent.
And you're either going to get beat up on. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And who was right in the end? The society actually solved some problems because of the people who spoke up. The society eventually crumbled, but let's note that the pushback against the terrible agricultural policies happened because people were willing to face death rather than go along with the lies of Lysenko. People were able to eat because people stood up for biological reality.
That's a way to think about it too, is at the very least, for anyone listening who's keeping their mouth shut and knows that they shouldn't be, you could at least be buying someone else some time. You could at least be buying somebody else some hope at the very least. It's not like you're going to save the world by running your mouth about everything, but like it's like every little bit helps, you know. Everybody has something to say right now because everybody's experienced this. Everybody has something of value to put into the conversation
And
because it's like at this point we're all affected.
I've seen finance people, I've seen restaurant executives. They don't know how ordinary customer service in a restaurant works very often. Because when they do go to a restaurant, it tends to be the fancy smancy restaurants, not the we're serving lower middle class people or working class people restaurants. Mm-hmm. So they're completely out of the loop for how things actually happen.
Yeah, so just I think saying, sorry.
So just saying something oftentimes provides more information than the people at the top had any idea about before.
It's how we bridge. And I mean, I feel like so much of the civil rights struggle and unions and everything going on with that was, hey, we need to be able to address certain things, certain grievances, certain safety hazards, like, you know, things like children working. You know, one of the things that happened over here over COVID is I could be wrong, it's like 15 or 16 you can start working at the Dollar Tree here now post COVID. And I'm just looking at that like, yeah, because I wasn't living in a society where everybody felt like they were struggling for a job or there wasn't adults on unemployment. It's like, we really need to open up the market to 16-year-old kids. Really? But people don't realize how much we're backpedaling with this shit, to where what's the point of fighting for addressing safety grievances and concerns in the workplace if even if you have the right, you're not going to do it? Because really, at least in the state of Oregon, if you look at OSHA laws, for as much as people feel like they can't do much, you have so much power over your restaurant or your store, anywhere these people work, you have a lot of power. If people actually open the manual and read the rules, I mean, you know the saying, like, a cop could look at your life for like a day or two and he could arrest you for X amount of crimes just for anybody. It's kind of the same for a restaurant. If you pay enough attention to your restaurant, it's not to say do it, but you could, any restaurant could be shut down by any employee at any given moment by what you know.
Oh yeah, restaurant inspections are the classic case of it being very easy to shut it down on the slightest pretext or just letting it slide for whatever purpose. The rules are so complex that it's very easy to shut them down, and it's very easy to find ways to operate without necessarily being the safest place. It takes employee and manager oversight to make sure things are actually safe, and then talking to the inspectors.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, always try to address things with your manager first. Always try to get on a good basis with them. But there's been instances at other places I've worked where it's gotten to the point where months go by and something's not addressed. Something's getting a certain way to where you can't deal with it. Only a manager can get involved, and it's like shutdown worthy. Like, why the fuck are there still rats in this place type shit? One of the places I used to work. That's when you use that power and leverage and you assert that over your boss and say, if you don't address this, and this, I'm calling somebody. And I'm not bullshitting you. And if you retaliate, there's rules against that. And I have had to tell people that before. And you know what happens 98% of the time? They back up, they get a little pissed off at you, but then they do what they fucking need to do. That is your power as a worker. That is the rights we were given in this country. Varies from state to state, I'm sure. And that's not to say you need to be an asshole to all your bosses, but there's sometimes you need to use that power.
And I think that's the case in every U.S. jurisdiction. employees have the power to contact the health department or whoever is handling restaurant inspections. And it's possible to have safe food, even if parts of the restaurant are a little grimy. But your ability to clean that up at least makes the odds better for everybody.
Yeah, and it's baby steps too. And once you get that in the culture, and once we can kind of normalize that a little bit, everyone wants to scream about workers' rights and how they're getting fucked over on pay. It's like, how about you try using what you got first, and then you try bitching? Because if you use what you got, really, it's 9 times out of 10, it's solved. Because if your managers don't want anybody from corporate breathing down their neck, they don't want to be shut down, nobody wants to lose any money. Use your power responsibly, but recognize you do have power.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people would be a lot happier in a well-run workplace than one that necessarily is horrible to work in but pays them a bit more. It's possible to have a pleasant workplace by just being direct to each other.
Yeah, the place that I work would be heaven on earth if there were just more communication skills, a little more back and forth. All places considered, I'm very happy with where I work, but it's a common theme that I see everywhere where, it's kind of like dividing up by class. The managers will hang out, and then the workers will hang out, and then everybody's just kind of over here, and then there's the managers talking about how they think the managers should run the store, and then the employees talking about how they think the managers should run the store and how they should run the store. And never shall the two cultures meet except for when there's some sort of headbutting. Which is one thing that I think is better with the place I work at, is at least there is a little bit more of that communication. But there's been other places I've worked at where I'm like, oh, you guys really, it's like you've never even met each other. Or I've worked in places where I've seen the boss for 5 minutes out of working 2 or 3 months there because they're always home talking to us through a phone.
Oh, God.
Subway. That's every fucking Subway.
Remote management. That's great for safety.
Oh, God, no. When I was there, I had this girl. She was like 16, 17, running the front of the kitchen, and she was bitching at me to clean out the microwave, but I wasn't allowed to unplug the microwave, except for when you stuck your hand in the microwave, the radiation was going and pinpricked you, so I told her I wasn't going to do that, and she fucking lost her shit on me. I think I threw a sandwich and might have called her a name by the end of the job, but on to greener pastures after that. But that's the kind of thing that you see place after place after place after place on all the places that middle class America and lower end tend to rely on. Like I said, Walmart, KFC, McDonald's, Home Depot, it's everywhere.
Okay, well, that's worse management than anything I've gotten.
And I would never want to be a manager either. That's why I don't do it. There's also a lot of managers that don't know how to manage, and they get into it and then they become contracted, and they're like, oh, this actually meant that I have to be responsible and that I have to know myself and know my job. And then those managers get locked in. I've seen that time and time again, where it's just like, yeah, good luck, buddy. The day that contract expires, I think like 3 or 4 people right now. Because it's like they have to trap people into being managers now, if you think about it.
I mean, that strongly suggests that there's some dysfunction at corporate because, okay, people don't want to be managers. Has an executive come down and actually gone around asking questions why people don't want to be managers?
Anytime I've ever seen that, they only talk to the managers and then sometimes the people making the complaints. Never are the entire staff asked, hey, this one boss that affects you all, what do you each individually think of this boss? That has never happened.
What the fuck?
Any place I've ever fucking worked. I worked at one place that called a meeting over a certain boss. A guy from corporate came in, made jokes about himself, talked about the boss for like 10 or 15 minutes, but not even him directly. I think they were just talking about bad management in general. Said that everyone was free to come talk to their bosses whenever they needed to, and then left. This person drove into town for this. So it's like, even the corporates like deal with your own shit a lot of the time.
And I can understand okay, I don't want to get involved. Is this a personal fight or whatever? But at the very least, take people aside and ask them questions. That's the whole point of driving on site. And I guess
That would
they
be too
weren't
common
trained.
sense.
I guess they weren't trained on how to actually investigate a work site either.
Which just goes to show what the training is. Because, I mean, at least for the workers, a lot of places I've worked, it's DEI training. Here's why we respect you for being gay or trans. Here's why your internal biases might hurt the next black customer that works in. And then
You
you
know
never
what
leave with
hurt
any
most?
job training.
At the restaurant I worked at, the black people who got hurt the most were the people asking, "Oh, is my server ignoring me because I'm black or because they're just fucked up?"
Like, are they assholes like this to everybody or just me?
I mean, when people are asking that question, something is freaking wrong. And I don't think giving people an online class on respect your customers is gonna fix it.
And again, if my boss is listening to this, just bear in mind I am thinking of so many places for all the different things that I'm talking about. And thank you for being a listener. Yeah, it's just something's broke, and we all got to do our part to contribute and do what we can, and to at least, like, we still have so much power as citizens of the United States of America. They just keep us in a place of realizing we don't have that power. We do have power over our trauma. We do have power over our anxiety. We do have power over our future. We do have power over our past. We do have power over a lot of things. Just because you're trained to believe you don't have power doesn't mean you can't just try to make yourself a little bit cockier and try. Because when in a society where nobody's trying anything ever, someone who actually tries something rings out. And I could think of a lot of different people who, just looking at through all the chaos, where it was just like, damn, like, you spoke out, you said something, you did something good. It's in my personal circles on YouTube, like whistleblowers, where it's just like one person saying something good, it creates a ripple effect. And it's so noticeable because everything else is just monogamous bullshit. It's just the same rut, day to day to day, mixed in with a little bit of chaos and a little bit of terror and a little bit of nihilism and existentialism. So when something hopeful actually comes through, it's fucking nice, you know? And just people got to realize that can be them in your workplace or in your family or your friend group. Like, just try at the very least, because they're trying to make it illegal for people to try. People need to remember that too. If you don't untrain yourself of that now, our free speech is about to be legislated away. So I'm going to be the best goddamn thought/hate criminal I can be and run my mouth like a motherfucker publicly, even when those laws and those freedoms are taken away from me. Like, train yourself not to live silently when this shit happens is the best I feel like people need to do, because they are training us for a darker day.
Scotland, they implemented hate speech laws.
Thousands of people got arrested. People don't realize that.
Well,
and what's that done to the prison system?
Well, the Scottish police backed down when a few people very openly complained, and J.K. Rowling, who was basically too rich to arrest, ended up speaking out and guaranteeing that anything someone gets arrested for, she'll say it as well, daring them to arrest her.
For everyone on the left who's saying that people with power and money never do anything good, take note of that shit.
I mean, she helped fund a women's shelter when the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Center ended up getting taken over by a shady person. So there are people who do good stuff.
And God bless her. And The Witching Trials of J.K. Rowling, if anybody out there hasn't listened to it, it's all on Spotify and maybe even YouTube. Awesome podcast. I won't spoil who's doing the interview, but I just say it's worth sticking around through all the chapters, because that woman's life is incredible, and she did a lot of good with her life. And for her to be attacked and labeled as a terrorist by her haters and people who should have read Harry Potter and learned the goddamn lessons of Harry Potter, like, we don't have to deal with you people anymore. Like, that's what J.K. Rowling's making clear. We don't have to deal with people like that anymore if we just say fuck you and we go back to living life how it was. Men are men, women are women, trans people exist, fuck non-binaryism, communism's bad, fascism's bad. Reality. Done with this shit. No Z's and Zers, no they thems, no fucking pedophiles at the Pride Parade, no men hitting women, in sports or otherwise. Just saying we're not going to engage with that reality anymore. We're going to do what we can within our power to get things back on track and to just hold up the finger and say, fuck you. Because that's what needs to happen. A lot of people need to hear fuck you right now. And that's just what it is. Because how long can you hear fuck you day in and day out? Fuck you for listening to this. Fuck you for doing this. Fuck you for saying this. Fuck you for believing this. Eventually, you got to say it back.
A lot of them can dish it out, but they can't take it.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't even take polite disagreement. There are so many people that I've listened to them rant and rave at me, and I politely disagreed with them, and they rant and rave at me for a few minutes, and then they just run off, and they don't bully anyone again. A lot of them can't take polite disagreement either.
And it's not like it hasn't been for trying, because I feel like most people listening to this right now, and most people in society, it was acted like people were ravenous from the beginning. The fact that this has gone on for so long goes to show how polite of a society we actually live in, that we've let this shit go on for this long. As crazy and tribal as we are, we've allowed a lot of this stupid shit to go on for a very, very long time. It's time to close that book. It's time to close it, move on, document it, observe it, learn from it. But at a certain point, we've got to close the book and say we're done. And that's going to be on the individual until collectively enough people do it. Because I'm tired of that goddamn book. It's old.
Even in DC, a bunch of the crazy political intimidation is just dying down. Some of the BLM DC can't even get that many likes on their tweets anymore. They used to be big. Most of the comments they get now are critical. Mm-hmm. They managed to get a couple dozen activists together from the entire regional area to protest against the crime bill. But they were struggling to get that. Mm-hmm. They don't have the ability to intimidate people the way they used to 4 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, even seeing, I like him. I don't agree with him on his politics, but even people like Al Sharpton, see him come on, or Cornel West, it's just like, it's just kind of an eye roll at this point. Even like figures that would have once been historical and you would have at least wanted to hear what they had to say. It just doesn't ring like it used to. It's just kind of like, all right, you're talking again. Cool. I got shit to talk about over here too. I don't really. And then you do tune in and it's just the same old story. It's still George Floyd. It's still the police. It's still. Yeah, I think people are tired.
Not even the regular activists are buying that anymore. And the legislators who push most of the defund the police, stop police from intervening and stuff capabilities, they ended up switching their vote months ago to say, and scrubbing their social media accounts, trying to deny that they were ever pro defund the police.
I feel like, especially with the migrant crisis, a lot of that's just. It's done. So many of the Trump era arguments have just now come to fruition, and it's just like, what can you say when a Venezuelan gang member is holding a machete to a 4-year-old girl's throat? What can you say at that point? That person should just roam free? That he's a victim of mental trauma? No, you know just as well as anybody else that person should probably go to jail. Like, it's just undeniable, and it's the conservative nightmare that a lot of people were fearful of, that people like me just ridiculed. Said, fuck you, you don't know as much as me. And now it's like, you can't write this. No one could have written this. AI could not write this. For as insane and off the wall as AI gets, it will never write anything as crazy as the 2020s.
Well, at least where I'm at, it feels like the weight of intimidation is lifting. I mean, we're still dealing with the weight of incompetence because a lot of incompetent people got into power, but it's nowhere near as scary as it was years ago.
I'm just worried about what the new intimidation factor is going to be, because all that tells me is that there's a void that's going to be filled.
Social media algorithms.
Again, mass social media suicide deletion campaign. Everybody just unplug all at once, all at the same time.
I'm at the point that I can't find a local news story about a professor engaging in plagiarism because Google decided to change their search mechanism uh, to uh, to downplay the Harvard plagiarism scandal. You have to find something else. And there's
Yeah.
alternatives to Google.
Yeah. And again, for anybody out there, just do a common Google search versus a DuckDuckGo search. It's not to say DuckDuckGo is great, but the biases are very evident.
And I can find more pages of local news articles about plagiarism in DuckDuckGo than I can in Google.
Or anything deemed conspiratorial. You know, I was going to do a video on Jade Helm and the AI systems going on in Israel and try to get a couple of collected sources. Got to go through DuckDuckGo because things involving Raytheon, government scandals, 9/11, reptilian agenda, even a lot of metaphysical channels, you can look it up on your own YouTube. You can look it up through Google in the video section, but until you go to DuckDuckGo and hit video, you will not find it. Ever. It's like it's completely hidden from you unless you happen to get it through that specific URL a lot of the time, which is why I'm trying to upload a lot of the crazier shit to my channels because I'd like to have a resource for people to just click and look at it. But it's a pain in the ass for videos that I'm just sitting here like, I know I saw that video 10 years ago. I know damn well that I fucking saw it. It'll take 2 hours to get to it, but I'll find it. I'm just not going to find it through Google. Ever.
And there's also a side effect of, oh, they're doing it to make sure things are trustworthy. And the actual reaction from people is paranoia because they've made it absolutely clear that they're going to hide stuff. And anytime people are secretive about information, people go into self-protection mode because they cannot, and frankly should not, trust the goodwill of the people trying to hide information.
Yeah.
This Google censoring stuff makes the situation even worse.
And we shouldn't even be talking about it in a country like America. We shouldn't even be having this goddamn conversation. That's the problem in itself.
And I
Because
think
we
that
need to
goes back
incorporate the
to,
internet.
and I think that goes back to these people are idiots. They don't seem to have understood how self-destructive cultures of censorship have been to complex societies like royalist France or czarist Russia or the Soviet Union. Because I've got entire books about safety disasters in the Soviet Union that were not addressed because of the culture of censorship. I know that because, frankly, that's life plenty of people have lived. But the people running these systems are idiots. They don't see the trade-off there.
And it just becomes more and more further disconnected too. I think with a lot of these college protests, it's basically guaranteed that for a lot of these colleges, you're not going to see, like, conservative numbers are going to go down. A lot of people on the right are going to go down. I feel like you're going to see a drop in male attendance. Anything outside of the verified demographics of the extreme woke left, those numbers are going to plummet in college applications. And I feel like even the African American community, because I think they've had enough of this shit too, and are probably feeling pretty betrayed that they were used and now everybody's jumped on the Muslims. But it's going to shatter the colleges. But whatever little bit of colleges remain, at that point, how could you be anything but a loyalist to these types of ideologies, or at least feel captured by it, or feeling like you're willing to look the other way? Like at that point, anybody in the colleges is leaving with the ideology, is absorbing the ideology, and these protests have just guaranteed that there will be less people to counter that. Not that there's very many to begin with, I don't think, at least think how things were going. But and then social media companies protect that. Like Twitter did like a weird rule change. It was either Twitter or Facebook after Andy Ngo talked about a black conservative speaker that was going to come to the U of O college here. They hid the post on the college from the people that were going to come counter the protesters because Antifa was going to come out. Those posts got censored. Antifa's posts got kept up. So you're allowed to gather for these protests, but you're not allowed to counter as far as social media is concerned. So social media is basically in bed with these institutional takeovers.
Oh, yeah,
Infiltration process.
That's been known since 2020.
Yeah. It's just the damage it's done by now is just so. I feel like I'm looking at, like, when I think of a college, I just think of rubble and scraps and tents at this point. I don't think of the first day I went to college and how big it was and the sun shining and how cool the buildings were and all the crazy things I'd never considered before. That magic just seems gone in my head.
I see university as basically a patchwork of individual fiefdoms, but a number of academic departments were clearly frauds, even back when I was an undergrad. And they just kept on getting more and more money thrown at them, more and more power. And even in regular fields like history, there was an effort to squeeze out people who didn't agree with the ideology. And it's been decades of double standards, and there's a lot of good in academic institutions, but that was basically thrown away when they went all out for left-wing ideology in 2016. And I don't see nearly as much insanity from mid-level schools that I do from prestige schools. But the prestige schools will probably tear down all the institutions because nobody's going to trust the schools that did things right because the schools that did things wrong are just so disastrous.
Yeah, and dominated in all the news feeds. I mean, I can't tell you anything that's happening at any other college outside of Yale and Harvard and all that. And before then, it was never even on my radar.
I mean, Stanford Law School, the administration was involved in one of the most shameful events in trying to organize students to protest against a sitting judge. This should never happen, even if for no other reason than you want these students to get a job. But that happened. But you don't see that from mid-level schools. It's the prestige politics that have driven people crazy.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I hope institutions like middle schools can continue to thrive, but everything else is just pedophilia and protest. That's what it feels like. John Hopkins.
I know a guy who got his PhD from John Hopkins, but that was a legit one, not
not one of the Alan Walker degrees.
God.
I've been putting together a video on that one. I hate that I'm having to revisit that, but I'm like, if I had to sit through the 30 minutes of this fucker talking, everybody else is going to sit through it too, because these people exist.
And they're enabled by academic bureaucracy that doesn't ask questions. They're supposed to be there. They're supposed to ask questions. Why aren't they?
And I think a lot of it too is it's covered with hate speech, because I mean, Alan Walker, the person who's trying to help promote the idea of minor attracted persons, who, like I said, 30 minutes is talking about this thing. What's the main cover they have to throw in there a couple times? Oh, well, people attacking people attracted to minors. It's just like when I receive attacks for being trans. They use the trans card. So because of all this hate speech bullshit, so because of all this trans bullshit and this non-binary bullshit, and because of this queer Marxist takeover, that little protection, all that person has to do, hey, we heard you're diddling kids. No, my research says that I'm virtuous, and I'm claiming that I don't, but also I feel like you're coming at me because I'm trans. So having those facts in mind, well, their work does say this, well, their claim is this, and now they're threatening me with a lawsuit for being transphobic in a society where that seems to be playing out pretty well for people like this. Keep doing what you're doing. And high level, low level, happening in a lot of places. Like,
I mean, a society that separates its thinkers from its soldiers has cowards for thinkers and soldiering done by idiots. I can't do the quote properly, but Thucydides, too strong a division between your warriors and your thinkers, and both systems break down.
100%. I mean, like, shitty warrior for sure, but back when I was in Antifa and I had that kind of Machiavellian protector instinct and I wanted to take care of all the trans people and all the black people, despite the fact that there was underlying psychological issues and there were other reasons, and there's a lot to be addressed with it for sure. Like I said, the thing that really got me out of it, a lot of it was LGBT issues, because for all my time, like saying I want to protect people, protect non-binary people, trans people, all this, if I had known half of what was going on at that moment that I was doing that shit and understood what I was protecting, I would not have. Like, if I would have known people were identifying as fucking animals and fucking kids and doing drag in front of babies and having little toddler raves and all this crazy shit, it would have never even been on in my head that this is something worth protecting. So that rings true. Like, if you want to play one part, at least be willing to step into the other side to at least try to balance yourself out to see what you're, not what you believe you're protecting, but what you're actually protecting.
There's an interesting bit of research about the left temporal parietal junction. When it's in between two parts of the brain, and when it's disabled, people can no longer really imagine how other people perceive the situation, but they also are more willing to tolerate evil behavior, for example, poisoning, if it doesn't have a directly observable bad effect. So there's a part of the brain that, if disabled, causes people to act like sociopaths.
Which probably turns off with trauma, generational trauma. Probably have a lot of people just being born without that. It makes sense.
No idea how it works, but we do see an effect.
That makes a scary amount of sense. To just know that you can feel like that's just the kind of instinct they're trying to hammer into us right now.
Well, I mean, with all you experienced, you still try to ask questions of the other side. So, and even people who have been horribly propagandized break out of it. So, yeah, people are going to do bad things. People are going to be trapped in a haze of bad ideas. But there's always people who try to break out of it, to think for themselves.
It's true. I just hope we can get some more going super quickly, because it's got to happen sooner rather than later. But Cyprian, I think we're going on about almost 4 hours here.
Oh,
and
wow.
Unfortunately, I got to go work, have fun, and do all those enjoyable things. And I don't know, is there any closing thoughts that you might have, or anything you want to cover before we leave?
I mean, if people really care about what they claim to care about, they should be okay with asking questions and talking to people.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully we can get a society based on that. And so I think it's been a good year for people waking up, for sure. Sometimes it's easy to feel hopeless, but like I said, conversations like this and just realizing how, yeah, these people are just fucking idiots. You know, it's a helpful notion, and it's true. And the more you put it into perspective, like I said, my brain gets conspiratorial and theorizing and speculative. But just simplifying a lot of these things down to, this really is just idiocracy at the heart of it. It rings true, and it makes a lot of sense.
Get on the road. life, the